They said I was too old for love, that my time had passed. But when the land syndicate came to take everything I'd built, and a quiet rancher offered me his hand in marriage, I had to choose. Lose it all to prove them right, or risk my heart on something the whole town called impossible. I'm Elena Whitaker, and this is how I turned their whispers into my victory. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bell above the door hadn't stopped jangling all morning, but Elena Whitaker barely looked up anymore. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, measuring flour, wrapping parcels in brown paper, making change from the wooden till without checking the count twice. 15 years in Red Hollow had taught her that survival meant keeping your head down and your hands busy. "Mrs. Whitaker, I need 3 yards of that calico," Martha Henderson said, her voice carrying that particular tone women used when they were about to say something cutting. "The blue one. Not that faded yellow. I know you're trying to move old stock, but I won't be taken for a fool." Elena pulled the bolt of fabric from the shelf without comment. Her scissors made clean, measured cuts through the cloth. 3 yards exactly. She'd learned long ago that precision left no room for complaint. "That'll be $1.20, Elena said, folding the fabric with corners that met perfectly. Martha counted out the coins with deliberate slowness, each clink against the counter like a small accusation. "You know, my sister's girl just turned 18, already has 3 suitors. Can you imagine?" She smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, she's got time, not like some of us had to rush into things." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Elena had been 19 when she married Thomas Whitaker, 21 when he died in a mining accident that should have been prevented but wasn't, because safety cost money and lives were cheaper. She'd been running this store alone ever since, and the fact that she'd turned it from a failing enterprise into the most profitable business in Red Hollow seemed to offend people more than comfort them. "Give Sarah my congratulations," Elena said evenly, sliding the wrapped fabric across the counter. After Martha left, Elena allowed herself one moment of stillness. Her reflection stared back from the window glass, dark hair pulled severely back, lines beginning to show around her eyes and mouth, a face that had forgotten how to look soft. 30 years old. The town talked about her like she was ancient. The afternoon crowd would arrive soon. She restocked the candy jars, straightened the display of men's work gloves, and checked the ledger. Numbers didn't lie or gossip. The store had turned a profit for the 43rd consecutive month. She'd expanded twice, added a line of quality tools that miners actually wanted, started carrying decent coffee instead of the swill the previous owner had stocked. None of it mattered when women like Martha Henderson looked at her and saw only what she wasn't: young, available, properly mourned and moved on, or properly resigned to spinsterhood. There was no acceptable middle ground for a woman who'd been widowed young and then had the audacity to keep living. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice came from the doorway, deep, quiet, with an accent that suggested he'd been raised somewhere else and traveled through places in between. Elena turned, ready with her shopkeeper's smile, and found it faltering slightly. The man was tall, which wasn't unusual, broad-shouldered from work, not posturing, which was rarer, but it was his face that made her pause. Weathered and sun-worn, with eyes that looked at her directly, without the usual quick assessment that men gave women they were categorizing, not evaluating her marriageability or her tragedy or her transgression of still being alive and working. Just looking at her like she was a person he wanted to address. "I'm looking for good rope," he said. "The kind that won't snap when you're pulling a horse out of trouble." Elena found her voice. "Manila hemp, 3/4 inch. It's expensive, but it's worth it." "I'll take 100 feet. She blinked. "That's a substantial order." "I've got a substantial ranch." He said it matter-of-factly, without the bragging edge that usually accompanied such statements in Red Hollow. "Just bought the Carver property, 2,500 acres, and most of it's been neglected for 3 years. Fences down, equipment rusted. Going to be a long season." Elena knew the Carver place. Everyone did. Old man Carver had drunk himself to death after his wife passed, and the property had sat empty while distant relatives argued over the inheritance. It was good land, with water rights and timber, but it would take serious money and serious work to make it productive again. She pulled down the hemp rope, measuring it out along the brass fixtures mounted on the wall for exactly that purpose. Her hands worked while her mind calculated. A man buying that property, ordering supplies like this, he wasn't passing through. He was planting roots. You'll need other things, she heard herself say. If you're rebuilding from nothing. He nodded slowly. I expect so. But I'm new enough to town that I don't know what I don't know yet. Advice would be welcome if you're willing to give it. There was something in the way he said it. Not flirtatious, not presumptuous, just honest. Elena felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest, something that might have been interest or might have been the long-dormant memory of what interest used to feel like. Depends on what you're trying to do, she said carefully. Make it work. Make it last. He met her eyes again. I'm Cole Mercer, by the way. Figured I should introduce myself if I'm going to be taking up your time with questions. Elena Whitaker. She finished coiling the rope, tied it off with twine. And questions are part of the service. That's $15. He paid in cash. New bills that said he'd come to Red Hollow with capital. Not a drifter or a dreamer then. A man with a plan. I'll probably be back tomorrow, Cole said, collecting his rope. If that's all right. Stores open 6 days a week. You come whenever you need to. After he left, Elena stood very still in the empty store. The bell had stopped jangling. Dust motes drifted through the afternoon light slanting across the floorboards. Outside, Red Hollow went about its business. The saloon opening for evening trade. The assay office closing. Miners trudging back toward their camps and boarding houses. She told herself it meant nothing. A new customer was just a new customer. The fact that he'd looked at her like a human being instead of a cautionary tale was simply good manners, nothing more. But that night, lying in the small room above the store that served as her home, Elena found herself thinking about the directness of his gaze, the competence in his hands, the way he'd asked for advice without making it sound like charity or courtship. She fell asleep telling herself she was being ridiculous. Men like Cole Mercer, successful, capable, still young enough that his best years weren't behind him, didn't look twice at women like her. Red Hollow had made that clear enough times that she should have learned by now. Cole Mercer came back the next day. And the day after that. At first it was supplies, nails, lumber, a new axe handle, lamp oil, salt pork, coffee. Practical purchases from a man setting up a working ranch. Elena helped him efficiently, professionally, keeping the interactions brief and transactional. But on the fourth visit, he lingered. Question for you, he said, leaning against the counter in a way that suggested he wasn't in a hurry. I've got a section of pasture that floods every spring. Previous owner tried to drain it with ditches, but they're all silted in now. Do I clear them out, or is there a better approach? Elena considered. Where's the water coming from? Mountain runoff, mostly. There's a creek that overruns its banks. Then ditches won't help. You need to redirect the creek before it reaches the pasture. There's a man about 10 miles north, Ezra Wright, who specializes in water management. He helped the Johnsons with a similar problem 3 years ago. Expensive, but it worked. Cole nodded thoughtfully. You know this area well. I've been here a while. How long? The question was casual, but Elena felt the weight of it. This was where she was supposed to mention Thomas, establish her widowhood, make clear that she was permanent damaged goods. That's how these conversations usually went. 11 years, she said instead. Came here with my husband. Stayed after he died. I'm sorry for your loss. The words were simple, not dripping with pity or curiosity, just acknowledgement. It was 9 years ago, Elena said. I've adjusted. I expect you have. He straightened, preparing to leave. You've built something impressive here. Stores well run. Best selection I've seen in 3 territories. The compliment caught her off guard. People complimented her prices sometimes, or her inventory, but they did it the way you'd praise a dog for a trick, surprised that she could manage it all. Thank you, she said, and meant it. After he left, Betty Carson appeared from the fabric section like she'd been lurking there, which she probably had been. That was quite a conversation, Betty said, voice loaded with implication. He had questions about his property. I answered them. He's been in here 4 times this week, Elena. A man doesn't need that many supplies unless he's looking for something else. Elena kept her expression neutral. He's rebuilding an entire ranch from nothing. He needs plenty of supplies. Betty picked up a spool of thread, examined it with theatrical interest. Folks are starting to talk, you know. Folks are always talking. Well, this time they're saying he's taken an interest. And honey, I know you're lonely, but a man like that, successful, still young, he's not looking at you that way. He's just being polite. Don't mistake kindness for courtship, or you'll embarrass yourself. The words hit exactly where they were aimed. Elena felt them land in her chest, sharp and precise. I'm not mistaking anything, she said quietly. Now, was there something you needed to purchase, or are you just browsing? Betty left without buying anything, which had probably been her intention all along. Elena closed the store early that night, something she almost never did, and sat in the gathering darkness of her small room. Don't mistake kindness for courtship. The phrase rattled around in her head, finding all the soft places and pressing on them. Because Betty was right, wasn't she? Elena had seen herself in the mirror that morning, 30 years old, with work-worn hands and a face that had forgotten how to be young. What would a man like Cole Mercer want with someone like her? She'd built a successful business, yes. She'd survived when everyone expected her to fail, true. But survival wasn't the same as being desirable. Competence wasn't the same as being wanted. Elena looked around her small room, neat, practical, containing everything she needed and nothing she wanted. This was her life. This was all her life was going to be. The sooner she accepted that, the less it would hurt when Cole stopped coming to the store, or when he started bringing a younger woman with him, or when he simply faded into the background of Red Hollow, like everyone else. Except he didn't fade. Cole came back 3 days later with a list written in careful handwriting, more supplies, more questions, more of those direct looks that made Elena feel like she was being seen instead of assessed. Ezra Wright came out yesterday, he said, watching her measure out lengths of chain. You were right about the creek. He's got a plan that should work. Said you'd steered 3 other ranchers his way over the years. He does good work. It makes sense to recommend him. You do this often? Help people solve problems that don't directly benefit your store? Elena paused. Sometimes, if I know the answer. That's generous. It's practical. Happy ranchers are repeat customers. Cole smiled at that, a slow, genuine expression that changed his entire face. You're a businesswoman first, then. I am. Nothing wrong with that. I respect it. He paid for his purchases, but didn't leave immediately. Can I ask you something personal? Elena's guard went up instantly. That depends on the question. Why does this town treat you like you're invisible? Or worse than invisible, like you're something to be polite about and ignore? The bluntness of it shocked her. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. He said it gently but firmly. I've been watching. You run the best store in 3 territories. You know more about this region than anyone I've met. You're clearly intelligent, capable, and honest. But people come in here, take your help, buy your goods, and then talk about you like you're, I don't know, a sad story instead of a person. Elena's throat felt tight. I'm a widow. That makes people uncomfortable. No. Cole shook his head. It's more than that. It's like they've decided who you're allowed to be, and they get offended when you don't comply. He'd seen it. In less than 2 weeks in Red Hollow, he'd seen what Elena had been living with for 9 years. I'm 30 years old, she said, and her voice came out harder than she intended. I'm widowed, I run a business alone, and I'm not interested in pretending to be fragile so people feel better about my existence. That makes me threatening, or pitiful, sometimes both at once. It makes you strong. Strength isn't attractive in women. Not here. Maybe not anywhere. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Elena actually laughed, a short surprise sound. Is it? Yes. Cole leaned on the counter, his expression serious. I've been on my own for 12 years, Mrs. Whitaker. I've worked ranches from Montana to Texas. I've met women who could outride, outshoot, and outthink most men I know. The ones worth knowing didn't see that as threatening. They saw it as interesting. Well, Red Hollow isn't Montana or Texas. No, but that doesn't mean you have to accept their verdict as final. The conversation was veering into territory that made Elena nervous. She busied herself with rearranging the items on the counter, avoiding his eyes. I should close up, she said. It's getting late. Cole nodded, accepting the dismissal. But at the door, he turned back. I'll be in town Saturday, he said. There's a new restaurant opened up, the Ridgeline, over on Prospect Street. I heard they serve actual food instead of the usual fried everything. Would you have dinner with me? Elena's hands went still. What? Dinner, Saturday. With me, if you're willing. Her mind went blank, then filled with a dozen reasons why this was impossible. She was too old. He was being polite. The town would talk. She'd embarrass herself. She'd misunderstood. This wasn't real. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. Cole's expression softened. Because I find you interesting. Because talking to you is the best part of coming to town. Because I'd like to get to know you better in a setting that doesn't involve measuring rope or discussing drainage systems. He paused. And because I think you deserve to be asked. Elena wanted to say yes. The wanting shocked her with its intensity, this sudden, fierce desire for something more than her carefully managed, safely small life. But the voices in her head were louder. Betty Carson's warning. Martha Henderson's smug superiority. 9 years of Red Hollow teaching her to know her place. I don't think that's a good idea, she heard herself say. Cole didn't look surprised, just disappointed. Can I ask why? Because people will talk. People already talk. Because I'm not... She stopped, unsure how to finish. Not young enough, not pretty enough, not hopeful enough. Not what? Cole asked quietly. Not what you think I am. He was quiet for a moment, studying her. I think you're a woman who's survived what would have broken most people, who's built something real out of nothing, who knows her own mind and doesn't apologize for it. If that's not what you are, then I've been badly mistaken. You barely know me. Then let me know you better. That's generally how these things work. Elena shook her head. I can't. Can't or won't? Does it matter? Yes. He said it firmly. Can't means circumstances are preventing you. Won't means you're preventing yourself. Those are different problems with different solutions. It's not that simple. Isn't it? Cole moved back toward the counter, his voice gentle but insistent. You're scared. I understand that. But you're letting that fear make decisions for you, and I think you're better than that. The words stung because they were true. Elena felt the anger rise, at him for seeing through her, at herself for being so transparent, at Red Hollow for making her this way. You don't know anything about me, she said coldly. You've been here 2 weeks. Don't presume to understand my life. You're right. I apologize. Cole straightened, and his expression shifted back to neutral. I overstepped. Thank you for your help with the supplies, Mrs. Whitaker. I'll see myself out. He left, and the bell above the door jangled with a finality that made Elena's chest ache. She locked up mechanically, climbed the stairs to her room, and sat on the edge of her narrow bed. The conversation played over and over in her mind, his invitation, her refusal, the disappointment in his eyes. She'd done the right thing, the safe thing. The thing that would prevent gossip and embarrassment and the inevitable moment when he realized she wasn't worth the trouble. So why did it feel like she'd just lost something she couldn't afford to lose? Sick. Cole didn't come back to the store for a week. Elena told herself she was relieved, told herself it was better this way. Cleaner, simpler, less complicated. She threw herself into work with renewed intensity, reorganizing the entire inventory system, staying open later, taking on a special order for mining equipment that required 3 days of correspondence with suppliers in Denver. The store ran perfectly. The ledger balanced. Everything was exactly as it should be, and she felt miserable. You're moping, Ruth Gardner said on Thursday afternoon. Ruth was one of the few women in Red Hollow who treated Elena like a person instead of a problem. She ran a boarding house on the edge of town and had no patience for nonsense. I'm not moping, I'm working. You're reorganizing inventory that was already organized. That's moping. Ruth set her purchases on the counter. Flour, sugar, dried beans. What happened? Nothing happened. Elena Whitaker, I've known you for 6 years. I've seen you handle everything from supply shortages to men trying to cheat you out of payment. You don't get rattled, but right now, you're rattled. Elena measured out the flour with excessive precision. A customer asked me to dinner. I said no, that's all. Ruth was quiet for a moment. The rancher, Mercer. How did you... Honey, I run a boarding house. I hear everything. Ruth leaned on the counter. Why'd you say no? Because it was inappropriate. Why? Because he's new in town and doesn't understand how things work here. Try again. Elena's hands stilled. Because I'm 30 years old, Ruth. Because I'm widowed. Because the idea of a man like him actually wanting to spend time with someone like me is absurd. Someone like you. Ruth repeated slowly. You mean successful? Intelligent? Capable of holding a conversation about something other than the weather? I mean old. The word hung between them, stark and ugly. Ruth sighed. Elena, you're one of the smartest women I know, so it genuinely baffles me that you've internalized this town's nonsense about age and worth. You're 30, not dead. I'm past my prime. According to who? Martha Henderson? Betty Carson? Women who are threatened by the fact that you've built a life without needing their approval? Ruth shook her head. You want to know what I think? I think you're using age as an excuse because you're scared of wanting something again. The accuracy of it hit like a physical blow. Maybe I am, Elena said quietly. Maybe I have good reasons to be scared. Of course you do. Everyone who's loved and lost is scared. Ruth's voice gentled. But you can't let that fear make you small, honey. You've already lost too much to voluntarily give up more. After Ruth left, Elena stood alone in her store, surrounded by the evidence of everything she'd built. Shelves stocked with goods she'd chosen, books balanced by her own hand, a business that turned profit month after month, year after year. It should have been enough. It had been enough for 9 years. She'd convinced herself that work was purpose, that independence was freedom, that she didn't need anything else. But Cole Mercer had walked through her door and asked her to dinner, and suddenly all those carefully constructed beliefs felt like the lies they'd always been. She wanted more. The realization terrified her. Saturday afternoon, Elena closed the store at 4 o'clock instead of 6. She went upstairs, looked at her reflection, and acknowledged what she'd been avoiding all week. She wanted to see him again, not as a customer, not as a shopkeeper serving someone's needs, as Elena, as a woman who'd forgotten what it felt like to be looked at, like she mattered beyond what she could provide. She changed into her better dress, dark green wool that she'd bought 2 years ago and rarely wore because there was nowhere to wear it. She took her hair down, brushed it out, and pinned it back up in a softer style than her usual severe bun. She looked at herself critically and saw a woman who was trying, which felt both hopeful and pathetic. The Ridgeline restaurant was on the opposite end of town. Elena walked there with her heart beating too fast, half hoping she'd find him there, half hoping she wouldn't. He was there. Cole sat alone at a corner table, reading a newspaper, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up when the door opened, and his expression shifted from neutral to surprise to something she couldn't quite read. Elena crossed the restaurant before she could lose her nerve. Is the invitation still open? She asked. Cole stood immediately. It is. Then I'm saying yes. If you're willing to forgive my rudeness last week. There's nothing to forgive. He pulled out the chair across from him. I'm just glad you changed your mind. Elena sat, feeling the stares of other diners, hearing the whispers that would become full-blown gossip by tomorrow morning. Part of her wanted to run, but Cole was looking at her with that same direct gaze, and she found herself staying. Why did you change your mind? He asked, once they'd ordered, roast chicken for her, beef stew for him. Because someone reminded me that fear is a terrible reason to make decisions. Smart person. She has her moments. The meal was easier than Elena expected. Cole talked about his plans for the ranch, the challenges he was facing, his previous work on other properties. She found herself relaxing, contributing thoughts and suggestions, even laughing at a story about a stubborn horse he'd tried to train in Wyoming. You're different tonight, Cole observed, midway through the main course. Different how? Less guarded, more yourself. Elena considered that. Maybe I am. It's been a long time since I've let myself be just me, without all the armor. The armor serves a purpose, I imagine. It did. Maybe it still does. She met his eyes. But it's also exhausting. Then take it off when you're with me. You don't need it here. The simplicity of the offer, the genuine warmth behind it, made Elena's throat tight. She'd been so certain that kindness from men came with conditions, with expectations, with eventual disappointment. But Cole seemed to mean exactly what he said. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Why me? And don't tell me you find me interesting. I want the real answer. Cole set down his fork, giving the question the seriousness it deserved. Because you're the first person I've met in years who doesn't perform. Everyone else is playing a role, the tough rancher, the proper lady, the successful businessman, but you're just straightforward. You say what you mean. You don't pretend things are fine when they're not, and that's rare enough to be valuable. I'm blunt because I'm tired of games.
Exactly. So am I. He leaned forward slightly. I've spent 12 years drifting, Elena, working other people's land, saving money, waiting for the right opportunity. I found it here. But I'm done drifting. I want to build something permanent. And I'd like to build it with someone who understands what that takes. The work, the sacrifice, the honesty. You barely know me.
I know enough to want to know more. He paused. And I know that you're braver than you think you are. Coming here tonight proved that. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this was real, that she wasn't making a fool of herself, that Red Hollow's verdict on her life wasn't final. They finished dinner, and Cole walked her back toward the store. The sun had set, and Red Hollow's few street lamps cast pools of yellow light across the dusty street. "Thank you for giving me a second chance," Cole said at her door. "Thank you for asking in the first place. Can I ask again? Next Saturday?" Elena smiled, a real smile, the kind she hadn't given anyone in years. "You can." He tipped his hat and left, and Elena climbed the stairs to her room feeling lighter than she had in 9 years. But the lightness didn't last. By Monday morning, the whole town knew about her dinner with Cole Mercer, and Red Hollow had opinions. Martha Henderson came in first, her face set in lines of disapproval. "Elena, honey, I need to speak with you frankly, as a friend." They weren't friends. They'd never been friends. "I'm listening," Elena said neutrally. "People are talking about you and that rancher, and I just want to warn you, don't get your hopes up. A man like that, with money and prospects, he's not looking for a wife who's already been married. He's being kind, but kindness isn't courtship. When he's ready to settle down, he'll look for someone younger, someone fresh. Fresh. Like produce. Like something unspoiled." "I appreciate your concern," Elena said, her voice like ice. "I'm just trying to save you from embarrassment. You've built a good life here, but there are limits. A woman your age needs to be realistic." After Martha left, Betty Carson arrived with similar warnings, couched in false sympathy. Then Sarah Morrison's mother. Then 3 more women, each with their own version of the same message. Know your place. Don't reach above your station. Accept what you are. Too old, too used, too independent to be desirable. By the end of the day, Elena felt beaten down, her brief moment of hope crushed under the weight of collective judgment. Cole came by that evening, after the store had closed. Elena almost didn't answer the knock, but he was persistent. "I heard what people have been saying," he said, standing in the doorway. "I wanted to make sure you're all right." "I'm fine." "You're not, and you shouldn't have to be." His jaw was tight with anger, not at her, but for her. "This town has no right." "They have every right," Elena interrupted. "It's their town, their rules. I knew what I was risking when I agreed to have dinner with you." "You weren't risking anything. You were living your life." "Those are the same thing here." She felt tired, defeated. "Maybe they're right, Cole. Maybe I was being foolish." "Don't." He said it sharply. "Don't let them make you small again. You were happy Saturday night. I saw it. Don't give them the power to take that away. It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." He stepped closer, his voice intense. "You get to decide what your life looks like, Elena. Not Martha Henderson. Not this town. You. And if you want to have dinner with me again, or walk down the street with me, or anything else, that's your choice to make." Elena wanted to believe him, but 9 years of conditioning was hard to override. "I need time to think," she said quietly. Cole nodded, though she could see the frustration in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. But know this, I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not going to stop wanting to know you better, no matter what Red Hollow thinks about it." After he left, Elena sat in the darkness of her store and cried. For the first time in years, she let herself cry. Not quiet tears, but harsh, racking sobs that hurt her chest and burned her throat. She cried for Thomas, dead 9 years and still shaping her life. She cried for the girl she'd been at 19, full of hope and plans. She cried for all the years she'd spent making herself acceptable to people who would never accept her. And she cried for the woman she might have been, if Red Hollow hadn't convinced her that being 30 and alone meant being finished. When the tears finally stopped, she felt emptied out, exhausted, but also strangely lighter.
Maybe Cole was right. Maybe she did get to choose. The question was whether she had the courage to make that choice, knowing what it would cost her. The answer came 2 weeks later in the form of an official-looking letter delivered to the store. Elena opened it with hands that started shaking before she'd read past the first line. Notice of property transfer and pending eviction. She read it 3 times, trying to make the words mean something different than they clearly meant. But there was no misunderstanding. The building that housed her store, the building she'd assumed she was buying through her monthly payments to the landlord, had been sold to the Red Hollow Land Syndicate, and the syndicate had no interest in honoring the informal purchase agreement she'd had with the previous owner. She had 90 days to vacate the premises, 90 days to pack up 11 years of work, 90 days to lose everything she'd built. Elena sat down hard, the letter crumpling in her fist. This couldn't be happening. She'd been so careful. She'd saved money, made payments on time, documented everything, but she'd never formalized the agreement in writing, trusting the previous owner's handshake deal. And now that owner was dead and his heirs had sold the property out from under her. The bell above the door jangled. Elena looked up, dazed, to find Cole standing there. He took one look at her face and crossed the store in 3 long strides. What happened? She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it, his expression darkening. This is legal? Apparently, the original owner never registered our agreement. It was all verbal, informal, and now they're stealing your business. They're exercising their property rights. Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. I was naive. I should have insisted on proper contracts. You trusted someone who shook your hand and made a promise. That's not naive. That's decent. Cole set the letter down, his jaw tight. Can you fight this? With what? I have some savings, but not enough for lawyers, and the syndicate has money and connections. I'd lose. So what will you do? Elena looked around her store, at the shelves she'd built and stocked, at the careful organization that had taken years to develop, at the ledger that proved her success didn't matter if she had no place to prove it. I don't know, she whispered. And for the first time since Thomas died, Elena Whitaker had no plan, no solution, no way forward. She'd built her life on being strong enough to survive anything, but she hadn't counted on this. The question now was whether she'd crumble under the weight of it, or whether she'd finally accept that strength didn't mean facing every battle alone. The next morning came too early and too bright. Elena had spent the night staring at the ceiling, running numbers that refused to add up, no matter how many times she rearranged them. Her savings would cover maybe 2 months of rent on another property, if she could even find one. Most buildings in Red Hollow were owned by the same syndicate that was evicting her, and the few that weren't were either too small or too expensive or both. She opened the store at 6 like always, because what else was she going to do? Sit upstairs and watch her life collapse? At least down here, surrounded by inventory and customers, she could pretend things were normal for a few more hours. Ruth Gardner came in at 7, took one look at Elena's face, and locked the door behind her. Tell me, she said simply. So Elena did. She pulled out the letter, now wrinkled from being folded and unfolded too many times, and handed it over. Ruth read it slowly, her expression growing darker with each line. Those bastards, Ruth said finally. They've been buying up property all over town for 6 months. I thought it was just expansion, but this is deliberate. They're pushing out anyone who won't sell to them outright. Why would they want my store? It's profitable, but it's not that valuable. It's not about the store. It's about control. Ruth set the letter down with careful precision, like she was restraining herself from tearing it up. The syndicate wants to own everything in Red Hollow. Can't have independent operators like you showing people there's another way. Elena hadn't thought of it like that. She'd been too busy panicking about her own situation to see the larger pattern. What are you going to do? Ruth asked. I don't know. Fight it somehow. Find another location. Start over. Even as she said it, the words felt hollow. Starting over required energy she didn't have and money she couldn't spare. You could talk to Cole. Elena's head snapped up. What? Cole Mercer, the man who's clearly interested in you and who has resources you don't. Ruth held up a hand before Elena could protest. I'm not saying use him. I'm saying let him help. There's a difference. I can't ask him for money, Ruth. We've had 2 dinners together. We're not. I know what you're not. But you're also not nothing. And from what I've seen, he's not the kind of man who'd stand by and watch you lose everything when he could help.
The problem was, Elena knew Ruth was right. Cole would help if she asked. He'd probably help even if she didn't ask. But accepting that help felt like admitting defeat, like proving Red Hollow right about her, that she couldn't actually make it alone, that she'd needed a man all along, that her independence had been temporary at best. I need to think, Elena said. Ruth nodded. Think fast. You've got 90 days, and that's going to disappear quicker than you expect. After Ruth left, Elena unlocked the door and tried to focus on work. But every customer felt like a countdown. How many more times would Mrs. Patterson buy her weekly flour? How many more miners would come in for tobacco and coffee? How long before word spread that the store was closing and people started going elsewhere? She was measuring out nails for Henry Wright when Cole walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept much either, his eyes tired but alert. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Elena finished with Henry, then led Cole to the back corner of the store where they wouldn't be overheard. "I've been thinking about your situation," Cole said without preamble, "and I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Try me. Marry me." Elena actually laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "That's not funny."
"I'm not joking." His expression was completely serious. "Marry me. Move your operation to the ranch. You keep running the store. I'll build you a proper space for it, better than this one. We combine resources, and you don't lose what you've built." "Cole, that's insane." "Is it? You need a solution. I'm offering one." "You're offering to marry a woman you barely know to save her business. That's not a solution. That's pity." His jaw tightened. "It's not pity. It's practical. I need help running the ranch anyway. Someone who understands inventory, ordering, finances. You need a location and backing. This solves both problems." "And what do you get out of it?" "A partner. Someone competent who won't treat me like a walking bank account." He paused. "And the chance to build something with someone I actually respect." Elena shook her head. "People already talk about us. If we get married, they'll say I trapped you, that I used the eviction as leverage, that you felt sorry for the desperate widow and made a mistake you'll regret." "I don't care what they say." "Well, I do." The words came out louder than she intended. She lowered her voice. "I care because I've spent 9 years building a reputation as someone who stands on her own. If I marry you now, under these circumstances, I lose that. I become the woman who needed rescuing. And I can't. I won't be that." "So you'd rather lose everything than accept help?" "I'd rather find another way." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "There is no other way, Elena. I've already asked around. The syndicate owns or controls every available property in town. You could fight them in court, but that takes time and money you don't have. You could try to relocate to another town, but that means starting from nothing with no established customers and no guarantees. Or you could accept that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you can't win alone." "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." Elena looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "When Thomas died, everyone expected me to fail. To sell the store and move back east, or find another husband quickly, or just quietly disappear. And I didn't. I proved them wrong. I built something real, something that mattered. And if I give that up now, if I let a man solve my problems, then they were right all along. I was just playing at independence, temporary, conditional, not real. That's the stupidest logic I've ever heard." The bluntness of it shocked her. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. It's stupid." Cole stepped closer, his voice intense but not angry. "You've been running this store successfully for 9 years. You've made it profitable. You've helped half the people in this town, even the ones who treat you like dirt. None of that disappears because you accept help when you need it. Your independence isn't diminished by partnership. It's expanded by it. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one being judged." "You think I'm not being judged? Every rancher in 3 territories watches to see if I'll fail. Watches to see if I can make the Carver property work when the last owner drank himself to death trying. I could insist on doing everything alone, prove I don't need anyone. Or I could be smart enough to accept that some things work better with 2 people. Elena wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because he was right, and she hated that he was right. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "You have 88 days. After that, the decision gets made for you." He reached out, almost touched her hand, then stopped. "I'm not trying to rescue you, Elena.
I'm trying to partner with you. There's a difference. After he left, Elena stood in the empty store and tried to imagine what marriage to Cole Mercer would actually look like. Not the fantasy version that her younger self might have dreamed about, but the real thing. Sharing a home, sharing decisions, sharing a life with someone who'd only been part of hers for a few weeks. It terrified her, but so did losing everything she'd worked for. The days blurred together after that. Elena went through the motions of running the store while her mind spun in circles. Cole came by twice more, but they didn't talk about his proposal. Instead, they discussed inventory and weather and the upcoming harvest season, dancing around the enormous question hanging between them. Meanwhile, Red Hollow continued its favorite pastime, gossip. "I heard he proposed," Betty Carson said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Is that true?" Elena didn't answer, just continued measuring out the fabric Betty had requested. "You know, if you do accept, people will say you manipulated the situation, used the eviction to force his hand. A man like him doesn't actually want to marry someone our age. He's just being noble, and noble proposals always end badly." "That'll be $3, Elena said flatly. After Betty left, 2 more women came in with similar warnings, packaged as friendly advice. By the end of the week, Elena felt battered by their certainty that she was making a mistake she hadn't even made yet. Ruth came by on Saturday with a bottle of whiskey and a determined expression. "We're closing early," she announced. "You're going to drink with me and actually talk about what you're feeling instead of pretending everything's fine." "I can't close early. I need every sale." "The store can survive one Saturday afternoon. You might not." Ruth locked the door and poured 2 generous glasses. "Drink." Elena drank. The whiskey burned, but it was a clean burn, clarifying rather than numbing. "He asked me to marry him," she said after the second glass. "I know, everyone knows. That's how gossip works. They think I'm using him. They think you're a threat to their world view. There's a difference." Ruth refilled both glasses. "What do you think?" "I think I'm terrified. I think marrying someone I barely know to save my business is either the smartest or stupidest thing I could do, and I don't know which." "Do you like him?" "Yes." "Do you trust him?" Elena considered that. "I think so. He's been honest with me, direct. He doesn't play games." "Do you want to marry him?" "I don't know. Maybe. If the circumstances were different, if we had time to actually know each other, if it wasn't all tangled up with losing the store and proving myself and what everyone thinks." She stopped, frustrated. "I can't separate what I want from what I need, and that feels dangerous." "Of course it does. But Elena, life doesn't wait for perfect circumstances. Sometimes you have to make decisions with incomplete information and hope you're right." "What if I'm wrong?" "Then you'll handle it. You've handled worse." Elena looked down at her glass, at the amber liquid that caught the afternoon light. "When Thomas died, I promised myself I'd never be dependent on anyone again, that I'd build a life that couldn't be taken away by someone else's choices or someone else's death or someone else's opinion of me. And now Cole's asking me to give that up. Is he? Or is he asking you to build something different, something bigger than what you could do alone? I don't know if I can tell the difference." Ruth reached across and took Elena's hand. "Then let me tell you what I see. I see a woman who's been so busy being strong that she's forgotten strong doesn't mean alone. Cole's not asking you to be weak. He's asking you to be part of something. That's not the same as losing yourself. What if the town's right? What if I am too old, too set in my ways, too damaged for this to work? The town said you'd fail when Thomas died. Were they right then?" "No." "Then why are you trusting their judgment now?" It was a fair question. Elena had no good answer for it. That night she pulled out the ledger and did what she always did when she was overwhelmed. She looked at numbers, facts, concrete reality. The store had 86 days left. She had enough savings for 2 months of expenses if she was careful. Her inventory was worth approximately $1,500 if she could sell it all, which she couldn't, not in that time frame. The syndicate would likely offer her pennies on the dollar for a forced sale. She could try to relocate to another town. Blackwater was 40 miles north, Cedar Ridge 60 miles south. Both had growing populations and might support another general store. But moving meant transportation costs, new relationships to build, starting from scratch in a place where she had no reputation and no connections. Or she could marry Cole Mercer. She wrote it out like a business proposition, trying to remove emotion from the equation. What would that actually look like? She'd move to the ranch, which meant leaving the town where she'd built her life, but also escaping the constant judgment. She'd run the store from there. Cole had promised to build proper facilities, and ranch hands always needed supplies, so there was a built-in customer base. She'd contribute her expertise and labor to building the ranch operation. In return, she'd have security, stability, and a partnership with someone who actually respected her capabilities. On paper, it made sense. But marriage wasn't paper. It was sharing a bed with someone, making decisions together, compromising on things that mattered, risking her heart on a man she'd known for less than 2 months. Elena closed the ledger and looked around her small room. This had been her sanctuary for 9 years. Safe, controlled, lonely. Maybe that was the real question. Not whether marrying Cole was smart, but whether she was willing to risk being lonely for the rest of her life to avoid the risk of being hurt. The next morning, Cole came by the store before opening hours. Elena had been expecting him. They'd fallen into a pattern of Sunday morning conversations, ostensibly about supply orders, but really about everything else. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said before he could speak. His expression didn't change, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. "And? I have conditions." "I'm listening." Elena had stayed up most of the night preparing for this conversation. She'd made lists, crossed things out, rewritten them. Now she pulled out the paper and read from it, because if she didn't, she'd lose her nerve. "First, this is a partnership, equal say and decisions that affect both of us. You don't get to override me because you're the man or because you're providing the land." "Agreed." "Second, the store remains mine, my business, my operation, my decisions. You can advise, but you don't control it." "Agreed." "Third, I keep my own money. Whatever I earn from the store is mine to manage. We can discuss shared expenses, but I'm not turning over my finances to you." "Wouldn't expect you to." "Fourth," she hesitated on this one, "we give this a real chance, not a business arrangement that we're both pretending is more. If we're going to get married, we're actually married. We try to build something real." Cole's expression softened. "I was hoping you'd say that." "But," Elena continued, "if it doesn't work, if 6 months from now we realize this was a mistake, we end it honestly. No bitterness, no blame. We just acknowledge it didn't work and figure out next steps." "I can agree to that, but I don't think it'll be necessary." "You can't know that." "No, but I can hope for it." He moved closer. "Anything else?" "Yes. I need you to understand that I'm not good at this. At being vulnerable, at needing someone, at letting my guard down. I'm going to fight you sometimes just because fighting is what I know. And I need you to be patient with that, because if you're not, this will fail before it starts." Cole reached out and took her hand, the first time he'd really touched her beyond handshakes and accidental brushes. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and steady. "Elena, I spent 12 years alone because I hadn't found anyone worth staying for. I'm not expecting perfect, I'm expecting real. And real includes fighting sometimes, and being stubborn, and having to work through difficult things. I'm not afraid of that. You might be, once you actually live with me. Then I'll deal with it when it happens. But I'm not backing out because it might be hard." Elena looked down at their joined hands. This was happening. She was actually going to do this. "Okay," she said quietly. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cole's whole face changed. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. Something relieved and genuine. "You mean it?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." "When?" "As soon as possible. No point dragging it out and giving people more time to talk." She pulled her hand back, suddenly businesslike. "We'll need to see the justice of the peace, file the paperwork, figure out logistics for moving the inventory." "Elena." She stopped, looked up at him. "You just agreed to marry me. You're allowed to take a moment before turning it into a project plan." "I don't know how to take a moment. Taking moments doesn't get things done. Maybe that's something we can work on together." Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. Maybe. They spent the next hour making actual plans. The wedding would be simple. Just the justice of the peace, maybe Ruth as a witness, no fuss. Cole would start construction on the store building immediately, so it would be ready when the eviction took effect. They'd move the inventory gradually, a wagon load at a time.
Elena would close the town store on the last possible day to maximize sales. It all sounded so practical, so sensible, like a business merger instead of a marriage. But when Cole left, he paused at the door and looked back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I know this isn't how either of us imagined getting married," he said, "but I'm going to do everything I can to make it work. I want you to know that." "I know," Elena said. And she did. Whatever else Cole Mercer was, he was a man who kept his word. After he left, she sat in the quiet store and let herself feel it. The terror and the relief and the strange, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she was making the right choice. The news spread through Red Hollow like wildfire. By Monday afternoon, everyone knew that Elena Whitaker was marrying Cole Mercer, and everyone had opinions. "You're making a terrible mistake," Martha Henderson said, her voice sharp with satisfaction. "He'll regret it within a year, and then where will you be?" "Married to a successful rancher with a thriving business," Elena replied calmly. "Where will you be?" Martha's face went red, but she didn't have a comeback. Not everyone was cruel. A few women offered quiet congratulations, their relief visible. Relief that Elena had found a solution, or maybe relief that her situation wouldn't force them to examine their own compromises too closely. But the majority ranged from disapproving to outright hostile. Elena was jumping into things too fast. She was manipulating Cole. She was going to embarrass herself. She was proving that women couldn't actually make it alone. She was, depending on who you asked, either pathetically desperate or cunningly calculating. Elena stopped listening after the first dozen variations. She had work to do. Cole started building the new store structure the following week. Elena rode out to the ranch to approve the plans and found herself genuinely impressed. He'd designed something twice the size of her current space, with proper storage, good light, and easy access from the main road. "This is going to cost a fortune," she said, looking at the framed walls already going up. "It's an investment. You'll make it back and increase sales." "We'll make it back. This is a partnership, remember?" Cole smiled at that. "Right. We'll make it back." Elena walked through the skeletal structure, already imagining where things would go. The dry goods here, the hardware there, maybe a separate section for women's items. She could expand her inventory, carry things the town store had never had room for. "You're planning already?" Cole observed. "Of course I am. That's what I do." "I'm starting to realize that." They stood together in the afternoon sun, looking at the ranch spread out around them. It was beautiful land, rolling hills, good grass, timber in the distance. Elena could see why Cole had chosen it. "Are you going to regret this?" she asked suddenly. "When the excitement wears off and you're stuck with a wife who's difficult and opinionated and set in her ways?" Cole considered the question seriously. "Are you going to regret it when you realize I'm stubborn and I work too hard and I'm not good at talking about feelings?" "Probably." "Then we'll regret it together." He looked at her. "Elena, I'm not expecting this to be easy. I'm expecting it to be worth it. There's a difference." "You keep saying things like that. Do you actually believe them, or are you just trying to convince me?" "Both." He said it simply, honestly. "I believe it, and I want you to believe it too. Because I think you're so used to fighting alone that you've forgotten what it's like to have someone on your side." Elena wanted to argue, but the truth of it stopped her. She had forgotten. Or maybe she'd never really known. They got married on a Thursday afternoon in late September, with Ruth Gardner and Cole's foreman Jack standing witness. The justice of the peace read the words, they signed the papers, and just like that, Elena became Mrs. Mercer. She waited to feel different. She didn't. Cole had arranged for a small dinner at the Ridgeline afterward, just the four of them, nothing fancy. Elena appreciated that he hadn't tried to make it into something bigger than it was. "To new beginnings," Ruth said, raising her glass. They drank to that, and Elena felt the weight of what she'd just done settle over her. She was married, again, to a man she'd known for 6 weeks. It was either the bravest or most foolish thing she'd ever done. "Stop overthinking," Cole said quietly, reading her expression. "I'm not overthinking. I'm thinking the appropriate amount." "You're panicking." "I'm not—" She stopped. "Okay, maybe a little." "That's fair. I'm a little panicked, too." The admission surprised her. "You are?" "Of course. I just married a woman who's smarter than me and probably going to run circles around me within a month. That's terrifying. Despite everything, Elena laughed. I'm not smarter than you. You definitely are, but I'm okay with it. They finished dinner, said goodbye to Ruth and Jack, and then it was time to go home. To the ranch. To their home, Elena supposed, though it didn't feel real yet. Cole had given her the master bedroom, larger, better light, more space. He'd moved himself to the smaller room down the hall. We'll figure out the rest as we go, he'd said. No rush. Elena appreciated that more than she could say. She wasn't ready to share a bed with him, and the fact that he didn't expect her to was a relief. She unpacked her few belongings, hung her dresses in the wardrobe, and tried to make the space feel like hers. It didn't work. Everything felt temporary, borrowed, like she was a guest in someone else's life. There was a knock on the door. Cole stood there with 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might want this, he said. It's going to be a long night of not sleeping and worrying. Might as well have good coffee while you do it. Elena took the cup, managed to smile. You're very sure I'm going to worry. I know you well enough for that. They sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the ranch. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it wasn't easy either. They were strangers learning to be something else, and the learning was harder than Elena had expected. Tell me something about you I don't know, Cole said after a while. Like what? Anything, something real. Not business facts or polite conversation, something that matters to you. Elena thought about it. I used to paint, before Thomas died, landscapes mostly. I wasn't very good, but I enjoyed it. Why'd you stop? No time, no space, no point, really. It wasn't practical. Do you miss it? The question caught her off guard. Did she miss it? She'd spent so many years focused on survival that she'd stopped thinking about things like joy or creativity or doing something just because it made her happy. Yes, she admitted. I think I do. Then you should start again. Cole, I don't have time. Make time. That's what partners do. They make space for each other to be whole people, not just workers. He took a sip of his coffee. My turn. I used to read poetry. Still do, sometimes. Bad poetry, sentimental stuff that would make most men laugh. But I like it. Elena tried to imagine this practical, competent rancher reading poetry and couldn't quite make the image fit. Really? Really? Everyone needs something that feeds their soul instead of just their stomach. For me, it's poetry. For you, it's painting. We should make room for those things. They sat in the gathering dark, 2 people who'd made a calculated decision, trying to find something genuine underneath the practicality. It wasn't comfortable, and it wasn't certain, but it was a beginning. And maybe, Elena thought, that was enough for now. The first week of marriage was strange in ways Elena hadn't anticipated. Not bad exactly, but disorienting. She woke up in an unfamiliar room, in an unfamiliar bed, listening to unfamiliar sounds, cattle lowing in the distance, ranch hands calling to each other, the creak of floorboards as Cole moved around downstairs making coffee. She'd expected the physical adjustment. What she hadn't expected was how much the small intimacies would unsettle her. Cole learning how she took her coffee, the way he'd leave her boots by the door after cleaning the mud off them, finding her favorite brand of soap stocked in the washroom without her having to ask. These tiny considerations felt more invasive than sharing a house, because they required him to pay attention, to notice things, to care about her comfort. Elena didn't know what to do with that kind of attention. The store construction progressed quickly. Cole had hired extra men, and the building went up faster than Elena thought possible. She spent her days dividing time between the old store in town and preparing inventory for the move, making lists and checking them twice, trying to control what she could control. On the 5th morning of their marriage, she came downstairs to find Cole already dressed for work, 2 plates of eggs and bacon on the table. You don't have to cook for me, she said. I was cooking for myself anyway. Making extra isn't difficult. Still, I can handle my own meals. Cole looked at her over his coffee cup, his expression unreadable. Elena, it's breakfast. I'm not trying to undermine your independence by frying eggs. I know that. I just don't want you to think... She stopped, frustrated with herself. I'm not good at this. At what? Eating? At being married. At letting someone do things for me. At not having to manage everything myself. She sat down heavily. I keep waiting for you to ask for something in return. For all of this to come with conditions I haven't seen yet. Cole set down his cup. What kind of conditions? I don't know. Control over the store, demands about how I spend my time, expectations about other things. She couldn't quite say it out loud, but he seemed to understand. I told you my conditions before we got married. Equal partnership, mutual respect, and a genuine effort to make this work. Those haven't changed. He paused. But I'm starting to realize that you spent 9 years with people who only helped you because they wanted something back. So you don't know how to accept help that doesn't come with strings attached. That's not, but it was true, and they both knew it. Elena looked down at her plate. Everyone wants something, Cole. That's just how the world works. Not everyone, and not always. He stood, picked up his hat. I've got to check the north fence line. Take your time with breakfast. The day'll wait. After he left, Elena sat alone in the kitchen and tried to remember the last time someone had done something for her without expecting payment or gratitude or eventual compliance. She couldn't. The old store in Red Hollow had 47 days left. Elena marked each one off in her ledger like a countdown to execution. The town had stopped being subtle about their opinions of her marriage. Women who'd been coldly polite before were now openly hostile, their judgment sharp as broken glass. Heard you're closing down, Martha Henderson said on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice dripping satisfaction. Shame you couldn't make it work on your own. I'm not closing down. I'm relocating. To your husband's property, under his control. That's not the same as running your own business, dear. Elena kept her expression neutral. The store remains mine. Cole has no ownership stake. Oh, honey, you really believe that? Martha leaned in conspiratorially. You're living on his land in his house, dependent on his goodwill. How long do you think you'll stay independent once he decides it's inconvenient? The words burrowed under Elena's skin and stayed there. She tried to dismiss them, tried to remember that Martha was bitter and jealous and wrong. But doubt was insidious. It found the cracks in her certainty and wedged itself in deep. That night, she and Cole had their first real fight. It started small. Elena had spent the afternoon rearranging the new store's layout in her mind, and when she got back to the ranch, she found that Cole had made decisions about the building without consulting her. You changed the window placement, she said, trying to keep her voice level. The builder said we'd get better light on the south side. It made sense. It would have made sense to ask me first. It's my store. I know it's your store, but I was here. The builder had questions, and I made a decision. That's not the same as taking over. Isn't it? Elena felt the anger rising, fueled by Martha's words and her own fears. You promised equal partnership, but you're making choices about my business without even talking to me. How is that equal? Cole's expression hardened. I made one practical decision about window placement because the alternative was delaying construction for 3 days while we waited to discuss it. That's not control. That's common sense. It's my store, Cole. Mine, not ours. You said, I know what I said, and I meant it, but you can't expect me to get your permission for every single minor decision when you're not here. That's not partnership either. That's you wanting absolute control while still benefiting from my help. The accusation stung because it was partially true. Elena wanted the security of marriage and the autonomy of independence, and she was beginning to realize those things might be incompatible. I never asked you to build the store, she said, knowing even as she said it that it was unfair. No. You just agreed to marry me based on my offer to build it, which I'm doing, exactly as promised. But apparently I'm supposed to read your mind about every detail while also not having any input whatsoever. His voice was rising now, frustration breaking through his usual calm. You want partnership when it benefits you and complete independence when it doesn't. You can't have both, Elena. Maybe this was a mistake. The words came out before she could stop them. Cole went very still. Is that what you really think? Elena wanted to take it back, but her pride wouldn't let her. I think we rushed into something neither of us fully understood. I think you want a wife, and I want to not lose my business, and those aren't the same thing as wanting each other. That's not fair. Isn't it? Be honest, Cole. If I wasn't being evicted, would you have proposed? Or would you have just kept coming to the store, being friendly, and eventually moved on to someone younger and easier? His jaw clenched. I proposed because you needed help and I wanted to give it, but I also proposed because I respected you and wanted to build something with you. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. You respected me. Past tense. I still respect you.
I just don't respect you throwing what I've done for you back in my face because you're scared. I'm not scared. Yes, you are. You're terrified that accepting help means losing yourself, that needing someone makes you weak, that if you let me in even a little bit, I'll take over everything. He moved closer, his voice dropping. But I'm not Thomas, Elena. I'm not going to die and leave you stranded. I'm not the men in this town who see women as either property or problems. I'm just a man who married you and is trying his best to make it work while you treat me like the enemy. I don't treat you like the enemy, don't you? You won't let me cook you breakfast without feeling guilty. You track every penny like I'm going to demand an accounting. You sleep with your door locked even though I gave you my word I wouldn't push you. And now you're accusing me of controlling your business because I made one practical decision about a window. He shook his head. I can't win with you. Anything I do to help is either patronizing or controlling. But if I don't help, I'm not holding up my end of the partnership. Elena felt tears prickling behind her eyes and hated herself for it. Maybe we're just too different. Maybe this can't work. Maybe it can if you won't let it. Cole grabbed his coat. I'm going to sleep in the barn tonight. You can have the house to yourself. Practice being independent. He left, and Elena stood alone in the kitchen with the ruins of their first real fight scattered around her like broken glass. She didn't sleep that night. She paced her room, replaying the argument, trying to figure out who was right and who was wrong, and finding that the answer was probably both and neither. Cole was right that she was scared. She was terrified, actually. Terrified of needing him, terrified of losing herself, terrified that the town was right and she'd made a terrible mistake. But she'd also been right about the window. Hadn't she? It was her store. She should get to make those decisions. Except Cole was also right that she couldn't expect him to wait for her approval on every minor detail. That wasn't partnership. That was her maintaining the illusion of control while hiding behind his resources. By morning, Elena felt wrung out and uncertain. She made coffee, burned the eggs she tried to cook, and sat at the table feeling utterly alone. Cole came back around 9, looking like he hadn't slept either. They stared at each other across the kitchen. I'm sorry, Elena said finally. About last night, about what I said. I'm sorry too, I shouldn't have lost my temper. You had a right to. I was being unfair. Cole poured himself coffee, sat down across from her. We need to figure out how to do this, Elena. How to actually be married instead of just living in the same house and circling each other like wounded animals. I don't know how. Neither do I. But we're not going to figure it out by fighting or avoiding each other. He paused. What are you actually afraid of? Elena traced the rim of her coffee cup, trying to find words for the tangle of feelings in her chest. I'm afraid that if I let myself need you, you'll leave, or change, or decide I'm too much trouble, and then I'll be right back where I started. Except worse, because I'll have forgotten how to stand alone. I'm not going to leave. You can't promise that. People die. People change their minds. People realize they made mistakes and want out. You're right. I can't promise forever. Nobody can. Cole leaned forward. But I can promise today. And tomorrow. And I can promise that I'm not looking for a way out. I'm looking for a way through. Through what? Through your walls, through your fear, through mine, for that matter. He managed a tired smile. You think you're the only one scared? I married a woman who's smarter and more capable than me, who doesn't need me for anything except the things she refuses to admit she needs. That's terrifying. Because what if you wake up one day and realize you actually don't need me at all? Elena hadn't considered that he might be afraid too. Hadn't thought that her independence might feel like rejection to him. I do need you, she said quietly. I just don't know how to admit it without feeling like I'm failing. That's something we need to work on then, both of us. Cole reached across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Elena took his hand. Can we make a deal? When we're scared or angry or confused, we talk about it instead of fighting or running, even if the conversation is difficult, even if we don't have answers. I can try. That's all I'm asking. They sat there holding hands across the kitchen table, two stubborn people trying to build something neither of them quite knew how to create. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't easy, but it was honest, and maybe that was more important. The store relocation happened in stages over the next month. Elena made trip after trip between town and ranch, transferring inventory, setting up the new space, trying to maintain business in both locations simultaneously. It was exhausting work, made harder by Red Hollow's continued judgment. But slowly, the new store took shape. Elena had to admit that Cole's changes, including the repositioned windows, actually improved the space. She had better light, more room, and a layout that made sense in ways the old store never had. Ranch hands started coming by for supplies, then their families, then people from neighboring ranches who'd heard about the new store. Elena's customer base shifted from town gossips to working people who cared more about quality and fair prices than about her personal life. She started to breathe easier. Cole kept his word about the store being hers. He offered opinions when asked but never pushed. He helped with heavy lifting and construction but didn't interfere with her business decisions. Slowly, Elena began to trust that he meant what he said about partnership. Their marriage settled into something that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't actively painful either. They ate meals together, talked about their days, gradually learned each other's rhythms and habits. Cole started leaving poetry books on the kitchen table for her to find. Elena bought paints and started setting up a small studio in the spare room. They were learning. Slowly, imperfectly, but learning. Then, 6 weeks into their marriage, everything changed. Elena was in the new store doing inventory when Jack, Cole's foreman, burst through the door. "Mrs. Mercer, you need to come quick. There's been an accident." Her heart stopped. "What kind of accident?" Cole was checking the north fence line. Horse spooked, threw him against a post. "He's conscious, but he's hurt bad. We need to get him to the doctor." Elena didn't remember the ride to the north pasture. One moment she was in the store. The next she was kneeling beside Cole's prone form, her hands shaking as she assessed the damage. He was pale, breathing shallowly, holding his left side. Blood seeped through his fingers. "Hey," he said weakly. "Sorry, stupid horse. Don't talk, save your strength." Elena turned to Jack. "We need a wagon, something flat. We can't move him like this without making it worse." They improvised a stretcher, loaded Cole as carefully as possible, and started the agonizing journey back to the ranch. Every bump and jostle made him grunt with pain, made Elena's chest tighten with fear. This was why she'd promised herself never to need anyone, because needing people meant this: the terror of potential loss, the helplessness of watching someone suffer, the awful knowledge that you couldn't control or fix or prevent the worst from happening. The doctor met them at the ranch house. He examined Cole, probed the injury with hands that looked too rough for medical work, and finally pronounced his verdict. 3 broken ribs, significant bruising, possible internal bleeding. He needs to stay still for at least 2 weeks, preferably a month. No heavy lifting, no riding, no work. Complete bed rest. "I can't," Cole started. "You can, and you will," the doctor said firmly, "unless you want those ribs to puncture something vital. You're lucky, Mr. Mercer. A few inches different, and we'd be planning a funeral instead of a recovery." After the doctor left, Elena sat beside Cole's bed and tried to process what had almost happened. He could have died. 33 years old, strong and capable, and he could have died from a stupid accident that took 30 seconds, just like Thomas. The parallel was too obvious to ignore. Elena felt the old panic rising, the certainty that loss was inevitable, that letting herself care was just setting herself up for devastation. "Hey," Cole said softly. "I'm okay." "You're not okay. You have 3 broken ribs and possible internal bleeding. But I'm alive, and I'm going to stay that way." He reached for her hand. "Elena, look at me." She did, and found him watching her with unexpected clarity. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "I know you're scared, but I'm not Thomas. This isn't the same situation." "Isn't it? You could have died, Cole, and I—" Her voice broke. "I can't do this again. I can't watch someone I care about die and then have to rebuild my entire life from nothing. You won't have to. I'm going to be fine." "You don't know that. The doctor said possible internal bleeding. Possible. Which means he doesn't know. Which means in 3 days or 3 weeks, you could take a turn for the worse, and I'll deal with it if it happens. But Elena, you can't live your life preparing for the worst. That's not living. That's just waiting to be hurt." She pulled her hand away, stood up. "I need to check on the store." Elena, but she was already leaving, already retreating behind the walls she'd briefly allowed to come down. Because this was the truth she'd been avoiding. Caring about Cole meant risking the kind of loss she'd barely survived once, and she wasn't sure she was strong enough to survive it again. The next 2 weeks were difficult in ways that had nothing to do with Cole's physical recovery. He healed steadily, following the doctor's orders with surprising patience. But Elena could feel herself pulling away, building distance between them, preparing for the loss that might or might not come. She threw herself into work, spending 12 and 14-hour days at the store, coming home exhausted and going straight to bed. She avoided conversation, avoided intimacy, avoided anything that might make her feel more than she already did. Cole noticed, of course. He wasn't stupid. "You're running away," he said one evening when she came home late again. "I'm working." "You're hiding." Elena set down her bag with careful precision. "I'm doing what I need to do to keep the store running while you recover." "The store would run fine with 10-hour days instead of 14. You're avoiding me." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. You have been since the accident. And I understand why, but Elena, you can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Pushing me away every time you get scared. Building walls every time something reminds you that life is uncertain." He struggled to sit up straighter, winced at the movement. "I'm not going to die from this injury. The doctor confirmed there's no internal bleeding. I'm healing exactly as I should be. But you're treating me like I'm already gone." "That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you had a real conversation with me? When's the last time you sat down for a meal instead of eating standing up? When's the last time you looked at me like I was your husband instead of a problem you're managing?" The accusations hurt because they were accurate. Elena had been managing him, managing her fear, managing the risk, managing the situation so she could maintain some illusion of control. "I'm trying to protect myself," she said quietly. "From what? From me? From caring? From the possibility that life might actually work out?" Cole shook his head. "You made me promise to talk when things got difficult. Now I'm asking you to do the same. Tell me what you're really afraid of." Elena sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed. "I'm afraid that if I let myself love you, I'll lose you. And losing you would destroy me. So it's safer to keep distance, to not let myself need you too much, to prepare for the worst. But preparing for the worst means you're not allowing yourself the best. You're not allowing us to actually be married. You're not allowing yourself to be happy because you're too busy protecting yourself from hypothetical pain. The pain isn't hypothetical. I've lived it. With Thomas. 9 years ago. And I'm sorry that happened to you, Elena. I'm sorry you had to go through that. But I'm not Thomas. And this marriage isn't that marriage. You can't make decisions about us based on what happened then. So what am I supposed to do? Just ignore the possibility that you could die or leave or realize you made a mistake? No. You acknowledge that those things are possible, and then you choose to build something anyway. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Elena looked at him. At this man she'd married for practical reasons, who turned out to be more than she'd expected, who was asking her to be braver than she felt capable of being. "I don't know if I can do that," she whispered. "You already did. You married me. You moved here. You're building a life with me. You just need to stop second-guessing the decision and actually commit to it." He reached for her hand again, and this time she let him take it. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Elena. I'm asking you to be present. To be here, with me, in this marriage, instead of one foot out the door preparing for it to fail. What if it does fail? Then we'll deal with it, together. But we can't build something real if you're too scared to try." Elena sat there holding his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, the steadiness of his grip. He was right. She'd been so focused on protecting herself from potential loss that she hadn't allowed herself to actually have what was right in front of her. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I know. Neither am I, but we're doing it anyway. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to get scared and pull away again. Probably. And when you do, I'll call you on it, just like you'll call me on my mistakes." He squeezed her hand. "That's what partnership means. Not getting it right all the time, but committing to work through it when we get it wrong." Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not a dramatic change, but a subtle softening, a slight lowering of the walls she'd maintained for so long. "Okay," she said. "I'll try. I can't promise I won't panic when things get hard, but I'll try to talk about it instead of running. That's all I'm asking." They sat together in the quiet evening, still learning how to be married, still figuring out how to let each other in. It wasn't easy. It wasn't what Elena had imagined marriage would be. But it was real,
and honest, and maybe that was enough.
Cole recovered fully over the next month. He went back to ranch work gradually, rebuilding his strength, proving that the accident had been just that, an accident, not a preview of inevitable tragedy. And Elena tried. She tried to be present instead of preparing for disaster. She tried to let Cole help without feeling like she was failing. She tried to accept that marriage meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risk, but risk might actually be worth it. They had dinner together every night. They talked about their days, their plans, their frustrations. Cole read her his terrible poetry. Elena showed him her paintings, which were rough and unpracticed but improving. They learned each other's habits, accommodated each other's quirks, and slowly built something that resembled actual partnership. It wasn't perfect. They still fought sometimes. Elena still panicked when things felt out of control. Cole still got frustrated with her inability to accept help gracefully, but they were learning to work through it instead of letting it break them. The store thrived. Elena's new customer base appreciated her fair prices and quality goods. Word spread, and people started traveling from farther away to shop there. She expanded her inventory, hired a part-time helper, and started turning profits that exceeded what she'd made in town. Red Hollow's judgment faded to background noise. People still gossiped, but Elena stopped letting it determine her worth. She'd built something real, both the store and the marriage, and other people's opinions couldn't change that. 3 months into their marriage, on a cold November evening, Elena realized she was happy. Not perfectly content, not without worries or fears, but genuinely happy in a way she hadn't been since before Thomas died. She was in the kitchen making dinner when Cole came in from his day's work. He hung up his coat, washed his hands, and came up behind her to look over her shoulder at what she was cooking. "Smells good," he said. "It's just stew." "You say that like stew can't be good." He didn't move away, and Elena found she didn't want him to. "Cole?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For being patient with me. For not giving up when I made it difficult. For seeing something in me worth fighting for." He turned her around to face him, his expression serious. "Elena, you've always been worth fighting for. You just needed someone willing to prove it." And there, in the warm kitchen with dinner simmering on the stove, Elena finally let herself believe it. Spring came early that year, melting the snow by mid-March and turning the ranch roads to mud. Elena stood in the doorway of the store, watching the first real customers of the morning arrive. 2 ranch wives from the neighboring property, their wagons splashing through puddles that reflected a sky finally clear of winter gray. "Mrs. Mercer," the older of the 2 women called out, "I heard you got in a shipment of calico from Denver. The good stuff, not that thin nonsense they sell in town." Elena smiled, stepped aside to let them in. "Just arrived yesterday. 4 different patterns, all quality weave." She'd stopped correcting people when they called her Mrs. Mercer instead of Mrs. Whitaker. It had felt wrong at first, like she was erasing Thomas or betraying her own identity, but Cole had pointed out gently that she could be both. The woman who'd survived Thomas's death, and the woman building a life with him. The names didn't cancel each other out. The store had become something she hadn't quite expected, not just a business, but a gathering place. Women came to shop and stayed to talk. Ranch hands stopped by for supplies and lingered over coffee that Elena had started keeping hot on the stove. Children pressed their faces against the candy jars while their mothers debated the merits of different flour brands. It felt like community in a way Red Hollow never had. Maybe because out here, people were too busy working to worry about who was too old for what, or who'd broken which unspoken rules. They cared about whether your goods were fair-priced and your word was solid. Everything else was just noise. Cole came in around noon, hat in hand, looking tired but satisfied. "North pasture's ready for the cattle," he said. "Jack thinks we can move them tomorrow if the weather holds. You want lunch? If you're offering." They'd fallen into this rhythm over the winter, small domestic moments that felt both ordinary and precious. Elena made sandwiches while Cole told her about the morning's work. He asked about her sales numbers, genuinely interested in the details she'd once thought would bore anyone who wasn't her. "I've been thinking," Cole said halfway through his sandwich, "about expanding." "The ranch?" "The operation. All of it. We're doing well, better than I expected for the first year. The store's profitable, the cattle are healthy, we've got good water and good land.
but we could do more. Elena felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Expansion meant risk, meant investment, meant trusting that what they'd built wouldn't collapse under the weight of ambition. What kind of expansion? She asked carefully. Additional pasture to the east. The Morrison property, they're struggling, want to sell. It's 800 acres, good grazing land, connects to ours. He paused, watching her face. But it would take most of our capital, and we'd need to hire more hands. It's a risk. You want to do it. I think it makes sense. But this is a partnership, Elena. I'm not making that decision without you. 6 months ago, she would have said no immediately, would have argued for safety, for keeping what they had, for not risking everything on might be. But she'd been learning, slowly, stubbornly, that growth required risk, that playing it safe sometimes meant staying small. Show me the numbers, she said. Let me see what we're actually talking about. They spent the afternoon going over finances, mapping out scenarios, discussing what expansion would actually mean. It was the kind of conversation Elena had once dreamed of having with Thomas, but never got the chance. Cole respected her business sense, asked for her opinion, actually listened when she pointed out potential problems. By evening, they had a plan. It was aggressive but not reckless, ambitious but achievable, and it required them to trust each other completely. We do this, there's no safety net, Elena said, looking at the final numbers. Everything we've saved goes into the land and the cattle. If we have a bad year, we could lose it all. We could, but if we don't expand now, someone else will buy that land. The opportunity won't come again. Cole met her eyes. I trust your judgment, Elena. If you think this is too risky, we don't do it. But if you're willing to take the chance, I think we can make it work. Elena thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, scared, defensive, determined to never need anyone or anything. That woman would have said no, would have chosen safety over possibility every time, but she wasn't that woman anymore. Let's do it, she said. They bought the Morrison property in April. The transaction took 3 weeks of paperwork, negotiations, and one tense meeting where the bank questioned whether Elena, as a woman, should be co-signing such a large loan. Cole had looked the banker dead in the eye and said if Elena wasn't on the paperwork as equal partner, there was no deal. The banker had signed. Moving cattle and establishing the new pasture consumed the entire spring. Elena split her time between running the store and helping coordinate the expansion. She worked harder than she had in years, fell into bed exhausted every night, and woke up energized in a way she'd forgotten was possible. They hired 3 new ranch hands, including a young woman named Sarah, who could rope better than most men and had no patience for anyone who thought that was unusual. Elena liked her immediately. Your husband always this stubborn about doing things the hard way? Sarah asked one afternoon. Watching Cole wrestle with a fence post he should have let the hired men handle. Usually, yes. Good to know it's not just me he won't listen to. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Sarah said, casual-like, people in town talk about you, you know. Elena's hand stilled on the inventory she'd been counting. I know. They say you trapped him, used your situation to force his hand, that he'll regret it once the novelty wears off and he realizes what he's stuck with. I know that too. Just wanted you to know they're full of shit. I've worked 6 ranches in 4 territories, and I've never seen a partnership like what you two have. Most men either ignore their wives completely or control everything they do. Cole actually listens to you, respects your opinion, treats you like you've got a brain in your head. Sarah shrugged. That's rare enough to be worth noting. After Sarah left, Elena stood in the quiet store thinking about perception versus reality. Red Hollow saw what it wanted to see, a desperate widow who'd snared a successful man. They couldn't conceive that Cole might have wanted a partner instead of an ornament, that he might value competence over compliance. Their loss, Elena thought. Let them tell their stories. She had work to do. Summer brought its own challenges. The expansion meant more responsibility, more details to manage, more potential points of failure. Elena found herself learning aspects of ranching she'd never considered: cattle rotation schedules, grass management, water rights negotiations with neighboring properties. She was good at it. The same skills that had made her a successful shopkeeper: attention to detail, ability to plan ahead, ruthless pragmatism about what worked and what didn't, translated well to ranch management. Cole recognized it before she did. You should take over the books, he said one evening in July. All of them, not just the store.
You're better with numbers than I am. Cole, that's your ranch. It's our ranch. And you're better equipped to manage the finances. I'm good at the physical work, at reading cattle and land and weather, but bookkeeping makes my head hurt. It doesn't bother you at all. That's because I find it calming, which is exactly why you should do it. He grinned. See? Partnership. We each do what we're good at. So Elena took over the complete financial management of the ranch. She created systems, organized records that had been haphazard at best, found inefficiencies Cole hadn't noticed, and corrected them. Within 2 months, she'd increased their profit margin by 8%, just through better record keeping and strategic purchasing. You're terrifying, Cole said, looking at her latest report. In the best possible way. They were learning each other's strengths, each other's blind spots. Cole could read land and animals with an intuition Elena didn't possess. She could see patterns in numbers that escaped him completely. Together they made something stronger than either could have built alone. But it wasn't all smooth progress and shared victories. They still fought. Still had moments where their different approaches clashed hard enough to leave marks. The worst fight came in August, over something that should have been simple. Cole wanted to sell a portion of their cattle to a buyer offering premium prices. Elena wanted to hold on to the stock, arguing that the following spring's market would be even better. They discussed it, disagreed, and thought they'd reached a compromise. Then Elena discovered Cole had made the sale anyway. She found out from Jack, who mentioned the buyer coming tomorrow to collect. Elena went very still, very cold.
When was Cole planning to tell me about this? She asked, keeping her voice level. Jack looked uncomfortable.
I thought you knew, ma'am. He said he'd talk to you about it. He talked to me. We didn't agree. She waited until evening, until the ranch hands had gone to their quarters, and she and Cole were alone in the house. Then she confronted him. You sold the cattle. Cole looked up from the harness he'd been mending. I did. The buyer offered. I know what he offered. We discussed it. I said I thought we should wait. And I disagreed. I thought this price was too good to pass up. So you made the decision alone, without consulting me again, without trying to convince me or find a compromise. You just did what you wanted. Elena's voice was shaking now, with anger and something deeper, betrayal. We're supposed to be partners, Cole. Equal partners. But you're treating me like my opinion is optional. That's not fair. We discussed it. You gave your perspective, I gave mine. Someone had to make the final call. And you decided that someone should be you, because it's your ranch, right? Your cattle. I'm just the wife who helps out. That's not what I think, and you know it. Cole stood, frustrated. Elena, we can't debate every single decision until we both agree. Sometimes one of us has to choose, and the other has to trust that choice. Trust goes both ways, and right now I don't trust that you see me as an equal partner. I think you see me as a valued assistant who you occasionally consult but who doesn't actually have decision-making power when it matters. Where is this coming from? I've given you complete control over the store, over the finances, over half the ranch operations, the half you don't care about as much. You're fine letting me handle books and inventory because that doesn't interest you. But when it comes to the cattle, the land, the things you actually care about, you make the final calls. Alone. Cole's jaw clenched. So what do you want? Veto power over everything? The ability to overrule me whenever you disagree? That's not partnership either, Elena. That's you wanting control. I want to be consulted, actually consulted, not just informed. I want my concerns to matter as much as yours. I want... Her voice broke slightly. I want to know that you respect my judgment enough to at least try to reach consensus before you make major decisions that affect both of us. The anger drained from Cole's face. You're right. I should have talked to you again before finalizing the sale. I thought I was making a good business decision, but I should have considered that making it without you would feel like betrayal. He paused. I'm sorry. Elena wasn't expecting the apology, wasn't expecting him to actually hear what she was saying instead of just defending himself. It disarmed her completely. I'm not trying to control everything, she said quietly. I'm trying to make sure I have a voice, that I'm not just decorative or convenient. You've never been either of those things. But I understand how it felt when you found out about the sale from Jack instead of from me. That was wrong. Cole moved closer. Can we make a deal? Any decision that involves more than $100 or affects the core operation, we discuss until we either agree or find a real compromise. Not just one conversation, but as many as it takes. What if we can't agree? Then we figure it out together. Maybe we alternate who makes the final call. Maybe we bring in a third-party opinion. But we don't just override each other. You're really willing to do that? To give up that much control? Elena, I haven't had control since the day I married you. You've been shaping every major decision we've made. I just haven't been good at acknowledging that formally. He managed a rueful smile. I'm learning too, learning that partnership means actually sharing power, not just saying I do while keeping veto authority. They talked for 2 more hours that night, hashing out what partnership actually meant in practice. Setting boundaries, establishing processes, figuring out how to make decisions together without one person always deferring to the other. It wasn't romantic. It was difficult and sometimes uncomfortable and required both of them to give up pieces of the control they were used to having. But it was necessary, and by the end, they had something that felt more solid than before. We're going to mess this up again, Elena said as they finally headed to bed. This won't be the last fight we have about power and respect and who gets to decide what. Probably not, but we'll figure it out, like we always do. Elena paused at her bedroom door. Cole was heading to his own room like he had every night for the past 8 months. Separate spaces, separate beds. A marriage that was real in every way except the physical. Cole? He turned back. Do you want... She stopped, unsure how to ask. Are you waiting for me to invite you in? Or do you not want that? His expression shifted to something vulnerable. I've wanted that since about a week after we got married, but I promised I wouldn't push, and I've been keeping that promise. What if I'm done waiting? Then you should probably tell me that clearly, because I'm not going to assume. Elena took a breath, gathering her courage. I'm inviting you in. Not tonight. I need to think about it first, prepare myself. But soon. If you want that, I want that. Whenever you're ready. Cole smiled, soft and genuine. No rush, Elena. We've got time. She went to bed that night thinking about vulnerability and trust and how terrifying it was to want someone, but also how much more terrifying it would be to deny herself that wanting just because it came with risk. 3 days later, she knocked on Cole's bedroom door after supper. He opened it, surprised. I'm ready, she said simply. If you're still willing. He pulled her inside, shut the door behind them, and kissed her with 8 months of restrained wanting. Elena kissed him back, feeling fear and desire tangled together in her chest. This was the last wall she'd been maintaining, the last piece of herself she'd been protecting. She let it fall. What happened between them that night wasn't perfect or smooth. It was awkward in places, hesitant in others, punctuated by nervous laughter and whispered reassurances. Elena's body remembered Thomas, compared involuntarily, and she had to consciously push those memories aside. Cole was patient, attuned to her hesitation, willing to stop if she needed to. She didn't need to stop. She needed to keep going, to prove to herself that wanting someone didn't mean losing herself. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Cole's bed, sweaty and breathing hard and somehow closer than they'd managed in 8 months of marriage. That was, Cole started, terrifying, Elena finished. I was going to say worth the wait, but terrifying works too. She laughed despite herself. I'm sorry if it's been a long time and I was nervous. Elena, you were perfect. Stop apologizing. He pulled her closer. We're married. We're allowed to be nervous and imperfect together. Is it always going to be this scary? Probably gets easier, but I don't know. I've never been married before either. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, 2 stubborn people finally admitting they wanted this. The intimacy, the vulnerability, the risk of actually loving someone. The ranch thrived through fall. The expanded operation proved to be exactly the right move. They had enough pasture to increase their herd by 40%, enough hands to manage the work, enough profit to start paying down the loan ahead of schedule. Elena's store became a regional destination. People traveled from 3 towns over to buy from her because her prices were fair, her quality was reliable, and she didn't cheat anyone. She hired 2 more part-time workers, expanded into mail order for customers who couldn't make the trip, and started turning profits that exceeded what she'd dared hope. The marriage deepened too. Elena and Cole moved into the master bedroom together, gave up the pretense of separate spaces. They learned each other's bodies, each other's rhythms, how to fight productively and make up thoroughly. They weren't always happy, but they were always honest, and that counted for more. In November, Elena realized her monthly bleeding hadn't come. She waited a week, then another, then reluctantly admitted what was happening. She was pregnant. The realization hit her with a complicated mix of emotions. Joy, because some part of her had wanted this even when she didn't admit it. Terror, because pregnancy meant vulnerability and childbirth meant risk, and motherhood meant another person to love and potentially lose. Anger at herself for not being purely happy about something that should be good news. She told Cole on a Sunday evening, pulling him aside after supper. "I'm pregnant." He went very still. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But my body knows. This is the same way it felt before." She stopped. She'd been pregnant once before, with Thomas. Had lost the baby in the 3rd month, just weeks before the mining accident that killed her husband. She'd never told anyone in Red Hollow about that loss. The grief had been too private, too tangled up with everything else. Cole seemed to understand without her explaining. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know. Scared, mostly. Pregnancy is dangerous. Childbirth kills women. And if something happens to me, She couldn't finish the sentence. "Nothing's going to happen to you." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll get you the best medical care available, that I'll make sure you're not working yourself to exhaustion, that I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe." He pulled her into his arms. "Elena, we're going to have a baby. That's terrifying and wonderful and overwhelming, but we'll handle it, together." She wanted to believe him, wanted to push past the fear and let herself be happy. But old ghosts were hard to banish, and the memory of her first lost pregnancy haunted the edges of this new one. The pregnancy progressed through winter. Elena's body changed in ways that felt both familiar and foreign. She got sick in the mornings, exhausted in the afternoons, ravenous at odd hours. Cole adjusted the ranch schedule to accommodate her, took on tasks she normally handled, and didn't complain when she snapped at him for hovering. Word spread, of course. Red Hollow heard about Elena's pregnancy and had the expected opinions. She was too old for childbirth, 31 now, practically ancient by their standards. The pregnancy was risky. She should rest completely, give up the store, let Cole handle everything. Elena ignored them. She kept working, modified as needed, but refused to become an invalid. Her body was doing something difficult, but difficult didn't mean impossible. In January, 5 months pregnant and showing enough that hiding it was pointless, Elena made a trip back to Red Hollow. She needed to finalize some paperwork related to the old store property, tie up loose ends she'd been avoiding. Betty Carson spotted her immediately.
"Elena, oh my goodness, look at you." Her voice dripped false sweetness. "You're positively glowing, and so brave, having a baby at your age. I'm sure everything will be fine, even though the risks, well, I'm sure the doctor has explained them to you." "He has." "Thanks for your concern. And still working. Shouldn't you be resting? I mean, in your condition, at your age." "I'm pregnant, Betty. Not dying." Elena kept her voice level. "And I'm perfectly capable of deciding how much work I can handle." Of course. I just worry. We all do. Especially after your first—" Betty stopped, realizing she'd gone too far. Elena went very cold. "How do you know about that?" "Oh, well, people talk. Someone mentioned that you'd been pregnant before and it didn't— I mean—" Betty actually looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought it up." "No, you shouldn't have." Elena turned and walked away, shaking with anger. She finished her business in town and drove the wagon back to the ranch in a storm of emotion. Someone had known about her first pregnancy and loss. Someone had gossiped about it, turned her private grief into public entertainment. And now Betty Carson and probably half of Red Hollow knew about the baby she'd lost 11 years ago. Cole found her in the barn that evening, sitting on a hay bale and crying. "What happened?" he asked gently. She told him. About Betty's comments, about her first pregnancy, about the loss that she'd never properly grieved because it had been swallowed up by Thomas's death just weeks later. About how violated she felt knowing people had been discussing it. Cole sat beside her, pulled her into his arms, and just held her while she cried. He didn't try to fix it, or minimize it, or tell her it didn't matter. He just let her feel it. "I'm scared," she whispered finally. "What if I lose this baby too? What if my body can't? What if I can't? Then we'll grieve together. But Elena, that pregnancy was 11 years ago. Your body is different now. The circumstances are different. This baby is strong. I can tell by how much it's been making you miserable." He managed a small smile. You're going to be fine, and so is our child. How can you be so sure? Because you're the strongest person I know, and because I refuse to believe we've come this far just to lose everything now.
His certainty helped, even when her own faith wavered. Over the following months, Cole's steady presence was the thing that kept Elena grounded. When she panicked, he calmed her. When she wanted to work herself to exhaustion to avoid thinking about the risks, he made her rest. When she woke up terrified in the middle of the night, convinced something was wrong, he held her until the fear passed. The baby came in late April, after 18 hours of difficult labor. The doctor was there, and Ruth and Cole refusing to leave even when the doctor suggested he might be more comfortable elsewhere. Elena had never experienced pain like that. It was consuming, all-encompassing, making her understand why women feared childbirth. There were moments she was certain she wouldn't survive it. Moments she begged for it to be over, one way or another. But then, finally, a baby's cry cut through the exhaustion, a sound so vital, so alive, that Elena felt something shift in her chest. "It's a girl," Ruth said, placing the tiny, squalling infant on Elena's chest. A perfect, healthy girl. Elena looked down at her daughter, red-faced and furious and absolutely real, and felt love so fierce it was almost painful. This was what she'd been protecting herself from. This overwhelming, terrifying, incandescent feeling that made every other emotion seem pale by comparison. "She's beautiful," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're both beautiful." "She's angry," Elena said, managing an exhausted laugh. "Listen to her. She's furious about being born." "Takes after her mother, then." They named her Margaret, after Cole's mother. Maggie, for short. And she was indeed furious about everything. Being hungry, being tired, being put down, being held wrong. She had opinions from day one, and she expressed them loudly. Elena loved her with an intensity that terrified her. Every time Maggie slept, Elena checked to make sure she was breathing. Every cry sent her running. Every milestone, first smile, first laugh, first time she held her own head up, felt like a miracle. "You need to sleep," Cole said one night, finding Elena watching Maggie's cradle instead of resting. "She's fine. I'm watching her." "I know. What if something happens while I'm sleeping? Then I'll wake you." "But Elena, you can't watch her every second. You're going to make yourself sick." "I can't lose her, Cole. I can't go through that again." He pulled her away from the cradle, led her back to bed. "You're not going to lose her. Maggie's healthy and strong and so loved it's almost ridiculous. But you have to take care of yourself too. An exhausted mother isn't good for anyone." Slowly, painfully, Elena learned to let go of some of the control. Learned to trust that Maggie would be fine if she slept for a few hours. Learned that Cole was a capable father who could handle their daughter without constant supervision. It was harder than any business challenge she'd ever faced. But she did it, one small trust at a time. Maggie thrived. By 6 months, she was rolling over, grabbing everything in reach, and babbling conversations that made perfect sense to her if no one else. By 9 months, she was pulling herself up on furniture, determined to walk before she was ready. The ranch continued to prosper. Elena managed to run the store and care for Maggie by bringing the baby to work with her, setting up a small play area in the back corner. Customers loved it. Women brought their own children to visit, creating an impromptu community of mothers who supported each other. Red Hollow's judgment had faded to irrelevance. Elena barely thought about the town anymore. Her life was here, on the ranch, with Cole and Maggie and the business they'd built together. On Maggie's first birthday, they threw a small celebration, just ranch hands and a few neighboring families, nothing fancy, but it felt significant. A year of survival, of growth, of proving that they could do this. Cole found Elena watching Maggie destroy a piece of cake with her hands, getting more on herself than in her mouth. "Happy?" he asked. Elena considered the question. She was exhausted. The store needed restocking, the ranch books needed updating, and Maggie had been teething for 2 weeks straight. Her body was still recovering from childbirth. Her hair was a mess. She hadn't painted anything in months. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I'm happy." "Even with all the chaos?" "Especially with the chaos. She gestured around at the messy kitchen, the laughing guests, the baby covered in cake, the life they'd somehow built. "This is everything I was too scared to want.
but I'm glad I stopped being scared. Cole pulled her close, kissed her temple. Me too.
They stood together watching their daughter, their guests, their life unfolding in ways neither of them had planned, but both had chosen. It wasn't perfect. It was often difficult, but it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough. 3 years passed in a blur of work and growth, and the particular chaos that came with raising a headstrong daughter who'd inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet determination. Maggie was 4 now, talking in full sentences that often sounded like negotiations, helping in the store by organizing the lower shelves in patterns only she understood, and asking questions that had no good answers. "Mama, why do some ladies in town look at you funny?" she asked one morning while Elena was doing inventory. Elena's hand stilled on the ledger. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "When we go to town, some ladies smile at me, but their eyes are mean when they look at you, like they're mad but pretending not to be." 4 years old and already reading people better than most adults. Elena set down her pencil and knelt to Maggie's level. "Some people don't like that Mama runs a business. They think women should only stay home and cook and clean. They get upset when someone does things differently than they expect." "That's stupid. Language, Maggie." "But it is. You're good at the store. Why would they be mad about that?" Elena pulled her daughter close. "Because sometimes people are more comfortable when everyone follows the same rules. When someone breaks the rules, even bad rules, it scares them. Makes them wonder if their own rules are wrong. Are their rules wrong? Some of them, yes. The rule that says women can't run businesses or be smart or make their own choices, that's a wrong rule. But it takes time for people to understand that." Maggie considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "When I grow up, I'm going to make my own rules. I have no doubt about that." The ranch had expanded twice more since Maggie's birth. They now ran over 4,000 acres, employed 15 full-time hands plus seasonal workers, and had become one of the most successful operations in the territory. The store had grown too. Elena had added a second building for dry goods, hired 4 permanent staff, and started a catalog business that shipped orders as far as California. Red Hollow still whispered, but the whispers had changed tone, less ridicule, more resentment. The Mercers were too successful, too visible, too much proof that the old ways weren't the only ways. It made people uncomfortable. Elena had stopped caring what made people uncomfortable, but the past had a way of catching up with the present. In late summer, Elena received a letter that brought everything full circle. The Red Hollow Land Syndicate was in financial trouble. The same organization that had evicted her 5 years ago was now collapsing under debt and mismanagement. They were selling off properties to cover their losses, including the building that had housed Elena's original store. The letter was from a lawyer in Denver, asking if she had any interest in purchasing the property. Elena stared at the letter for a long time, feeling the weight of irony. The building they'd stolen from her was now available again. She could buy it, reclaim what she'd lost, prove something to the people who'd written her off. Cole found her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in front of her, her expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" he asked. She handed him the letter. He read it, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Are you going to buy it?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to. Wants to walk back into Red Hollow, owning the building they said I wasn't good enough to keep. Wants to prove I didn't just survive, I won. But I don't need to prove anything anymore. I've built something better here. Why go backward just to make a point?" Cole sat down across from her. "This isn't about going backward. It's about deciding whether you want that property as part of moving forward. Do you need it for business? Would it serve a purpose? Or would you just be buying it out of spite?" Elena laughed despite herself. "When did you get so wise?" "I married you, had to develop some wisdom just to keep up." She thought about it for 2 days, running numbers, considering options, trying to separate emotion from business sense. Finally, she made her decision. She bought the property. But not to run another store or to prove anything to Red Hollow. She bought it and turned it into something the town actually needed. A community center. A place where women could gather, where children could learn to read, where people could access resources they couldn't afford elsewhere. She hired Ruth Gardner to run it. "You're serious about this?" Ruth asked when Elena proposed the idea. "You want me to manage a community center in the building where they evicted you from?" "I want you to manage a place that helps people who need help. The irony is just a bonus." The center opened in October. Elena attended the opening, walking through the familiar space that now served an entirely different purpose. The shelves that had held her merchandise now held donated books. The counter where she'd measured fabric now served as a desk, where Ruth helped people write letters or fill out paperwork. The back room that had been her storage now hosted reading lessons for women who'd never learned. Martha Henderson showed up, her expression complicated. "This is generous of you," she said stiffly. "It's practical. The town needed this. I had the resources to provide it." Elena kept her voice neutral. "That's all." "Is it revenge? Making us accept charity from someone we—" Martha stopped, unable to finish. "It's not charity, and it's not revenge. It's just what needed doing." Elena met her eyes. "You once told me I was too old for love, too independent to be wanted, too damaged to build anything real. You were wrong. But I'm not doing this to prove you wrong. I'm doing this because I can, and because it matters." Martha left without responding, but Elena caught something in her expression that might have been shame. Or maybe understanding. It was hard to tell. The community center thrived. Women came for the reading lessons and stayed to talk to each other, to share problems, to realize they weren't alone in their struggles. Men came reluctantly at first, then more openly, using the resources Ruth provided to improve their own situations. Red Hollow was changing, slowly, and Elena had planted the seed of that change in the very building where they'd tried to end her. That winter brought a crisis that tested everything they'd built. A severe cold snap hit in January, lasting for 3 weeks and devastating livestock across the territory. The Mercer Ranch lost 30 head of cattle despite their best efforts. Other ranches lost more. The Morrison property, the family they'd bought land from, lost everything. Frank Morrison came to the ranch in February, hat in hand, looking 20 years older than when Elena had last seen him.
"I need to ask a favor," he said, his voice rough with pride swallowed. "I know we're not close, and you don't owe me anything, but I'm losing the rest of my land. The bank's foreclosing, and I've got nowhere to go, no way to feed my family." Elena and Cole exchanged a look. They'd survived this winter, but barely. Taking on additional burden was risky. "What are you asking for?" Cole said.
"Work. Any work you've got. I'm good with cattle, good with my hands. I'll do whatever needs doing. Just, I need to keep my family fed." Elena thought about desperation. Thought about being 19 and widowed with a failing store, everyone expecting her to collapse. Thought about the people who'd helped and the ones who'd stood by watching to see if she'd fail. "We can use another hand," she said, before Cole could respond. "Especially with spring coming. We've got a bunkhouse with space. Bring your family. We'll figure out the details." After Frank left, Cole raised an eyebrow. "We just committed to housing and feeding 4 more people. You sure about that?" "No, but it's the right thing to do." "Agreed. Just making sure you'd thought it through." The Morrison family moved into the ranch the following week. Frank proved to be exactly what he'd claimed, a capable worker who pulled his weight without complaint. His wife Mary started helping in the store, bringing an organizational efficiency that freed Elena for other tasks. Their 2 children became Maggie's constant companions. It was crowded and chaotic and required adjustments from everyone. But it worked. Spring brought calving season and the usual controlled chaos. Elena was in the store when Sarah came running, her face urgent. "Mrs. Mercer, we've got a problem. Cole's out at the far pasture and one of the cows is breached. We need help now or we're going to lose both her and the calf." Elena had learned enough about ranching to understand the stakes. A breached calf meant death if not handled immediately. And Cole was 2 hours away. "Get Frank. Tell him to bring rope and the medical kit. I'll meet you there." She grabbed Maggie, deposited her with Mary, and ran for the pasture. By the time she arrived, Frank and Sarah had the cow restrained, but the situation was bad. The calf was coming backwards, legs visible, but nothing else. Elena had watched Cole handle breached births before, had paid attention even though she'd told herself it wasn't her responsibility. Now that knowledge was the difference between life and death. "We need to turn the calf," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Frank, hold her steady. Sarah, get ready to pull when I say." What followed was messy and difficult and terrifying. Elena had to reach inside the cow, feeling for the calf's position, trying to manipulate it while the mother bellowed in pain. Her hands were slick with blood and fluid. Her arms ached. She was certain she was doing it wrong, certain the calf was already dead,
certain she was making things worse. But then she felt something shift. The calf's position changed. One more adjustment, a hard pull from Sarah, and suddenly the calf was coming out right, slipping free in a rush of fluid and motion. It lay still for 3 heartbeats. Then it shook its head, took a gasping breath, and tried to stand on wobbly legs. The mother cow immediately began licking it clean, ignoring the humans who'd just saved both their lives.
Elena sat back in this mud and manure, exhausted and shaking, covered in blood up to her elbows.
"That was incredible," Sarah said, her voice awed. "Mrs. Mercer, you just saved them both." "I had no idea what I was doing. Could have fooled me. You were as calm as Cole would have been." Elena looked down at her ruined dress, her filthy hands, the evidence of work she'd never expected to do. And she started laughing, exhausted, slightly hysterical laughter that released all the tension of the last 30 minutes. Cole found her like that when he returned an hour later, still sitting in the pasture, watching the calf nurse. "I heard what happened," he said, sitting down beside her despite the mud. "You delivered a breached calf." "I had help. You led the team. That's different." He looked at her with something like wonder. 5 years ago, you were running a store in town. Now you're delivering calves. How did that happen?" "I married a rancher. Apparently it's contagious." "Apparently?" He pulled her close, ignoring the blood and mud. "I'm proud of you." "For getting dirty?" "For being willing to get dirty. For not saying that's not my job, or I don't know how. For just doing what needed doing." That was the thing about their life, Elena realized. It kept requiring them to do things they didn't know how to do. Keep trying things that might fail. Risk what they'd built for the chance of building more. And somehow, they kept doing it. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and small victories. Maggie grew into a fierce, intelligent child who questioned everything and accepted nothing at face value. The ranch expanded again. The store became a regional institution. The community center in Red Hollow served hundreds of people, changing lives quietly but persistently. Elena painted when she could find time, capturing the landscape she'd made her home. Cole kept reading his terrible poetry, sometimes reciting it to her in the evenings when Maggie was asleep. They fought about money and priorities and how to raise their daughter. They made up and made love and made plans for a future that kept expanding beyond what they'd imagined. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised her with a gift, a professionally painted sign for the store reading Mercer and Company, established 1870. "Company?" Elena asked. "What company?" "You. Me, Maggie, Frank and Mary and Sarah and everyone else who's built this with us." He pointed to the small print at the bottom. "Founded by Elena Whitaker Mercer." She traced the letters of her full name, both names, both identities, finally together. "You put my maiden name on it." "Of course I did. You built the original store as Elena Whitaker. You're building this one as Elena Mercer. Both names matter. Both women are part of this." It was a small thing, but it meant he understood that she'd never stopped being the woman who'd survived Thomas's death and built something from nothing. Marriage hadn't erased that woman. It had just given her more to work with. That fall, Martha Henderson came to the store. She looked older, tired, her trademark superiority worn down by years of being wrong about Elena. "I need to talk to you," she said. Elena braced herself for criticism or judgment, but Martha surprised her. "I was wrong about you. 10 years ago I told you that you were too old for love, that Cole would regret marrying you, that you couldn't make it work. I believed it, and I was completely wrong." Elena didn't know what to say. "I've watched you build something remarkable," Martha continued. "Not just the business, but the life, the marriage, the family. And it's forced me to reconsider a lot of assumptions I had about what women can do, about what makes a good life, about what really matters." She paused. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you changed my mind, and probably saved my daughter from making the same mistakes I did." "What do you mean?" "Sarah, my daughter, who you met years ago. She wanted to go to college, study business. I told her it was a waste, that she should focus on finding a husband. But she brought up you as evidence that women can succeed in business, can build something meaningful, and I couldn't argue with her because you're living proof." Martha managed a small smile. "She starts at the university in Denver next month." After Martha left, Elena stood in her store feeling the weight of influence she'd never intended to have.
She'd just been trying to survive, to build a life, to prove to herself that she was more than the town's verdict on her worth. But apparently, that had been enough to change someone else's trajectory. Small victories, she thought. Sometimes that's all change was. One person at a time, one mind shifted, one daughter given permission to dream bigger than her mother's limitations. Maggie turned 7 that spring. She was reading at a 10th grade level, helping manage inventory in the store, and announcing regularly that she was going to run an even bigger business than Mama when she grew up. "What kind of business?" Elena asked one evening. "I don't know yet, but it's going to be important, and nobody's going to tell me I can't do it because I'm a girl." Cole caught Elena's eye across the table, both of them trying not to smile. "No," Elena said seriously. "They probably won't dare." That summer, the ranch faced its biggest test yet. A wildfire started in the eastern timber, driven by drought and wind, racing toward their property faster than anyone could contain it. Cole organized the hands to create fire breaks while Elena coordinated evacuation of the livestock and essential equipment. For 3 days, they fought the fire alongside neighboring ranches, Red Hollow volunteers, and even some of the land syndicate's former employees who showed up to help. The fire destroyed 2,000 acres of grassland and threatened to take the rest. But it didn't. Through exhausting work and some luck with wind shifts, they contained it, saved the buildings, saved most of the cattle, saved the core of what they'd built. In the aftermath, standing in the blackened landscape, Elena felt the precariousness of everything they had. One spark, one wind shift, and it all could have been gone. "We're going to rebuild," Cole said, reading her thoughts. "I know, but Cole, what if next time we can't? What if we lose it all despite doing everything right? Then we'll start over. Again. Like we always have." He pulled her close, both of them covered in ash and smoke. "Elena, we've faced eviction, injury, drought, winter kill, and fire. And we're still here, still standing. That doesn't happen by luck. It happens because we're too stubborn to quit." "Is that what this is? Stubborn?" "Stubborn, determined, brave, call it whatever you want. But we don't quit. That's who we are." The rebuild took 18 months. They replanted grass, repaired fences, slowly restored what the fire had taken. It was expensive and exhausting, and there were days Elena wondered if they should just sell what was left and start something smaller, safer. But they didn't. They kept working, kept building, kept proving that they could survive anything. By Maggie's 9th birthday, the ranch had recovered completely. They'd actually expanded the cattle operation, using the rebuild as an opportunity to improve systems they'd been tolerating for years. The store was more profitable than ever. The community center in Red Hollow had spawned 2 more in neighboring towns. Elena was 39 years old. By Red Hollow's original standards, she should have been long past her prime, quietly fading into irrelevance. Instead, she was running a regional business empire, raising a brilliant daughter, and married to a man who still looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. One evening, she and Cole sat on the porch watching Maggie chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The ranch stretched out around them, peaceful and prosperous, and permanent in ways that defied the temporary nature of everything they'd survived. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't married?" Elena asked. "Sometimes. You'd probably have found another solution, built something else. You're too resourceful not to." "Maybe, but it wouldn't have been this. No, this required both of us." Elena thought about the girl she'd been at 19, marrying Thomas with such certainty that she knew what her life would be. Thought about the widow at 21, certain her life was over. Thought about the woman at 30, convinced she was too old and too damaged for anything more than survival. All of them had been wrong about what was possible. "I'm glad I was wrong," she said. "About what?" "About everything. About being too old, too broken, too set in my ways to build something new. About needing to do everything alone. About safety being more important than risk." She leaned against him. "I'm glad you didn't let me stay wrong. I didn't do anything except show up and be honest." That was everything. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter, their land, their life. It wasn't perfect. It was often difficult. But it was real and hard-earned and absolutely theirs. Maggie ran up to the porch, breathless and glowing. "Mama, I caught 7 fireflies. Papa, did you see?" "I saw. You're getting fast."
I'm getting smart. I figured out their pattern. She climbed into Elena's lap despite being almost too big for it. Mama, tell me the story again about when you started the store. Elena had told this story 100 times, but it never got old. She told Maggie about being widowed young, about everyone expecting her to fail, about building something from nothing through sheer determination and spite. And then you met Papa and he helped you? Then I met your father and we helped each other. That's different than him rescuing me. Because you didn't need rescuing. Exactly. Maggie considered this. When I grow up, I'm going to find someone who helps me without trying to rescue me. That's all anyone should look for. After Maggie went to bed, Elena and Cole stayed on the porch, neither ready to go inside and end the day. What do you think she'll do? Cole asked. Our daughter, when she's grown. Something impossible, probably. Something people will tell her she can't do. And then she'll do it anyway. Like her mother. Like both her parents. You're just as stubborn as I am. True, but I'm practical about it. Elena laughed. Practical. That's what you're calling it now? They talked late into the night, making plans and telling stories and simply being together in the way that only came from years of shared history. Eventually, they went to bed, lying tangled together in the darkness. Elena? Cole said quietly. I love you. Not because you're perfect or because this is easy, but because you're real and you're here and you chose to build this with me. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. After 10 years, the words still mattered. Maybe mattered more because they'd been tested and proven true. I love you too. Even when you're stubborn and impossible and won't admit you're wrong. I'm never wrong. There. That's exactly what I'm talking about. His laugh rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her. They fell asleep like that, two people who'd survived everything life threw at them and came out stronger on the other side. The years continued. Maggie grew into a formidable young woman who indeed started her own business. A freight company that eventually connected 3 territories, built on the same principles of fair dealing and hard work that Elena had modeled. She married at 24, a quiet accountant who was smart enough to be her partner instead of trying to control her. The ranch passed to new hands eventually, when Cole and Elena were ready to step back and let others do the heavy work, but they never fully retired. Elena kept her hand in the store, mentoring young women who wanted to start businesses of their own. Cole consulted on ranch management, helping younger operations avoid mistakes he'd made. They grew old together, watching their legacy spread through the territory in ways they'd never planned. The community centers, the changed attitudes about women in business, the model of actual partnership instead of ownership, small changes that added up to something significant. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Red Hollow threw them a celebration. The whole town turned out, including people who'd once whispered that Elena was too old, too independent, too much. Martha Henderson, now in her 80s, made a speech that acknowledged her past mistakes and praised Elena's impact on the community. Betty Carson, who'd warned Elena not to mistake kindness for courtship, admitted she'd been completely wrong. Elena stood before the crowd, Cole beside her, Maggie and her family in the front row, and felt the weight of a life well lived. Not perfect, not without struggle or pain or mistakes, but real, honest, built on the foundation of choosing courage over safety, partnership over independence, growth over stagnation. People ask me the secret to a long marriage, she said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. They want some romantic answer about love conquering all or finding your soulmate. But the truth is simpler and harder than that. The secret is choosing every day to show up, to do the work, to admit when you're wrong and forgive when the other person is. To build something together that's bigger than what either of you could create alone. She looked at Cole, found him watching her with the same direct gaze that had caught her attention 50 years ago. I was 30 when we married. Red Hollow told me I was too old for love, that my time had passed, that I should accept my limitations and be grateful for whatever scraps life offered. I almost believed them, almost let fear and other people's expectations define what my life could be. She paused, looking out at the crowd, at Martha, who'd told her she was making a mistake, at Betty, who'd warned her not to embarrass herself, at all the people who'd judged her and found her wanting. But I didn't. I took a risk on a man I barely knew, on a future I couldn't predict, on the possibility that maybe, just maybe,
I deserved more than I'd been told I could have, and it was the best decision I ever made. Second best, Cole interjected. First best was saying yes when I finally wore you down. The crowd laughed. Elena swatted his arm. The point is, she continued, that we don't know what we're capable of until we try. We don't know what our lives can become until we stop accepting other people's limits and start creating our own possibilities. I thought I was too old at 30, but I've lived another 50 years since then. 50 years of work and joy and struggle and growth. Half a century that wouldn't have existed if I'd believed what everyone told me about my limitations. She scanned the crowd, finding the younger faces, the women watching her with the same hunger she'd once felt. So if you take anything from our story, take this. It's never too late. You're never too old, too damaged, too set in your ways to build something new. It won't be easy. It won't be perfect. But if you're willing to risk comfort for growth, safety for possibility, and fear for courage, you might be surprised by what you're capable of creating. The celebration continued long into the night. People shared stories, danced to fiddle music, celebrated not just Elena and Cole's marriage, but what it represented, the possibility of defying expectations and creating something real. Late that night, back at the ranch house they'd built together, Elena and Cole sat in the same spot where they'd had their first real conversation as a married couple. The chairs were different now, worn comfortable by decades of use. The view was the same, rolling land, distant mountains, stars scattered across the sky like promises. Tired? Cole asked. Exhausted, but happy. Any regrets? Elena thought about it seriously, about the struggles, the fights, the times she'd been certain they'd made a mistake, about the hard years and the scary moments, and the 1,000 small compromises that partnership required. No, she said finally. Not a single one. Not even that time I made the decision about the cattle without consulting you? Oh, I still haven't forgiven you for that. He laughed, the sound familiar and beloved. Fair enough. They sat together watching the stars. Two people who'd built a life from nothing but determination and trust. Who'd proven that strength didn't mean going it alone, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that the best things in life required risk. Elena thought about the woman she'd been, all the versions of herself that had led to this moment. The young bride full of hope. The widow convinced life was over. The shopkeeper building walls to protect a broken heart. The woman who'd almost said no when offered a second chance. She was grateful to that woman for finally choosing yes. For being brave enough to admit she wanted more than survival. For taking the risk that led to everything else. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up. For seeing something in me worth fighting for when I'd stopped seeing it myself. For being patient while I learned how to trust again. Cole took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that plagued them both. Thank you for letting me in, for choosing to build this with me, for making my life infinitely more interesting than it would have been otherwise. Just interesting? Terrifying, challenging, exhausting, and absolutely worth every second. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands under the stars, surrounded by everything they'd built together. The ranch, the business, the family. The legacy of changed minds and opened possibilities. It wasn't the life Elena had planned at 19. It wasn't even the life she'd imagined at 30. But it was the life she'd chosen at every critical moment afterward, chosen risk over safety, growth over stagnation, hope over fear. And that choosing had made all the difference. The next morning, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and Cole already up, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. She lay there for a moment, savoring the ordinary miracle of another day, another chance to live the life she'd fought so hard to build. At 80 years old, she still ran the store twice a week, still painted when inspiration struck, still argued with Cole about ranch management and money and how to handle their grandchildren, still surprised herself with what she was capable of when challenged. She got up, dressed, and went downstairs to find Cole making breakfast like he had for 50 years. Some things never changed, and some things, the important things, just kept getting better with time. Morning, he said, handing her coffee exactly how she liked it. Morning. She accepted the cup, kissed his cheek, settled into the rhythm of another day. Outside, the ranch was waking up. Inside, two people who'd built something impossible continued doing what they'd always done, showing up, doing the work, choosing each other, and the life they'd created. It was enough. more than enough. It was everything. And somewhere in Red Hollow, a young woman stood in the community center reading books that taught her she could be more than what anyone expected. Dreaming of businesses she might build, lives she might create, possibilities no one had told her existed. Elena's legacy wasn't just the ranch or the store or even the family. It was the permission she'd given, through living, through defying expectations, through refusing to accept anyone else's verdict on her worth, for other women to do the same, to believe that 30 wasn't too old, that 40 wasn't too late, that any age was young enough to start something new if you had the courage to try. That strength came not from never needing anyone, but from choosing the right person to need. That partnership didn't diminish you, it multiplied what you could become. That the best answer to judgment was simply living well, building something real, proving through action, not argument, that the old rules were wrong. Elena had done all that, not perfectly, not easily, but thoroughly and honestly, and with a determination that had changed not just her own life, but the landscape of possibility for everyone who came after. She'd been told she was too old for love, too independent to need anyone, too damaged to build anything lasting. She'd proven them all wrong, not through words, but through the irrefutable evidence of a life lived fully, a marriage built on bedrock, a legacy that would outlast her by generations. And in the end, that was the only triumph that mattered. Not proving others wrong, but proving yourself right. Trusting your own capacity for growth, for change, for building something beautiful out of the ruins of what came before. Elena had done that, and in doing so, she'd shown countless others that they could too. The sun rose higher, painting the ranch in golden light. Another day began. Another opportunity to live, to work, to love, to build. Elena stood beside Cole at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, looking out at everything they'd created together. 50 years of choices. 50 years of partnership. 50 years of proving that the best stories don't end when everyone says they should. They just begin in a different key. Ready for the day? Cole asked. Elena smiled, squeezed his hand, and turned toward whatever came next. Always, she said, and meant it.